Chapter 743. Both Naruto and Sasuke are kind people. It is precisely because of the kindness in their hearts that Naruto and Sasuke will tirelessly pursue the so-called peace. But there is also a distinction between kindness. Naruto's kindness is equal kindness. As long as someone stands in front of him and needs help, Naruto will pass on his kindness to the other party. But Sasuke's kindness is not like this. Sasuke's kindness will only be given to those who he thinks are worthy of kindness as a gift. In other words, it is conditional kindness. Between Naruto and Sasuke's kindness, who is better and who is worse, no one can give a correct answer. However, Naruto and Sasuke's different attitudes towards kindness also make Naruto and Sasuke may have different choices when facing problems. Just like now, Naruto chose to coexist to bring peace to the ninja world, Sasuke chose to conquer and rule of law to achieve peace. The path chosen by Uzumaki Naruto is like the path of the Holy Mother. He believes in the possibility in everyone's heart. He believes that as long as the right opportunity is created, then peace will definitely come to the world when everyone understands each other. The path chosen by Uchiha Sasuke is more like the path of evil spirits. He sees all the bad habits in everyone's heart in his own eyes and formulates corresponding, strong and effective laws and regulations to restrain the bad habits in people's hearts. However, the ninja world itself is a situation of fragmentation. Although it is difficult for people to understand each other, it is still possible through some opportunities. But Sasuke's plan to almost break all the old patterns and build a new world is undoubtedly a declaration of war on the whole world. Fortunately, there is such a powerful blood cloak pavilion in the ninja world. Otherwise, if Sasuke wants to realize his plan, his hands will be stained with more killing. Naruto saw that Sasuke's plan may have a negative impact on Sasuke himself and the whole world. Naruto, who was still holding back, had no intention of going easy at this moment. He forcibly stimulated the remaining Senjutsu chakra and chakra in his body and directly attacked Sasuke. On the main battlefield, the disciples of Blood Cloak Pavilion and the ninjas of the Ninja Allied Forces were also fighting at this moment. As the battle continued, both the Blood Cloak Pavilion and the Ninja Allied Forces suffered a large number of casualties. A large number of Blood Cloak Pavilion disciples and ninjas of the 5 major ninja villages couldn't fight because of serious injuries or deaths. However, the large number of casualties did not make Nangongja and Watergate have any intention of retreating. On the contrary, they became braver as the more they fought, the more they fought, the more they fought, the braver they looked. In the beginning, Minato and Nangongja didn't hold back at all. They directly displayed their most powerful strength. In an instant, the battlefield was almost filled with sword energy and golden light, but after all, Nangongja and Watergate had a lot of energy during the battle with Nangongja and Watergate. Such a high-intensity battle didn't last long. In fact, from the beginning, the two could have directly used such a method to determine the outcome of the battle by relying on skills and wisdom, but after all, the war wasn't a battle between two people. In order to boost the morale of their respective camps and make the people in their camps full of fighting spirit, Nangongja and Watergate used such a seemingly unwise method of attack that consumed a lot of energy. But the battle continued until now, whether it was the disciples of Blood Cloak Pavilion or the ninjas of the 5 major ninja villages, the blood in their hearts has been stimulated. There was no longer a need for Watergate and Nangongja to use such a laborious method to establish the will to fight in their hearts. Watergate and Nangongja naturally returned to such a low-consumption battle mode, where they were always ready to find the opponent's loopholes to attack. Nangong, it's time for you to stop your crazy actions, right? Previously, you said that you didn't believe that the 5 major ninja villages would be willing to share the cake in your mouth with the Blood Cloak Pavilion, so you insisted on competing with the Ninja Allied Forces formed by the 5 major ninja villages to show your muscles. But Nangong, please look at the current battlefield. Whether it is the Ninja Allied Forces or the Blood Cloak Pavilion, there are a lot of casualties at the moment. If this continues, it won't be about showing your muscles to fight for enough benefits for yourself, but it will be about the Bloodcloak Pavilion and the 5 major ninja villages fighting to the death. Is this the result that you want, Nangong? To be honest, Watergate's heart has become anxious now. After all, at this moment, a large number of ninjas are being killed in front of him. Ninjas are not warriors. Ninjas don't need the glory of pioneering new territories. Ninjas only need the benefits in front of them. So before the start of this battle, Watergate deliberately left some Woodleaf ninjas to stay in the Woodleaf village, and crowned these ninjas with an irrefutable reason, to protect the daimyo. To be honest, although the daimyo of the 5 major ninja villages were not useless, they were almost not far away. Most of the time, they were like wage earners, succumbing to the violent mechanisms of the 5 major ninja villages and managing the affairs of the entire country in exchange for their own comfort and luxury. Although the Kage of the 5 major ninja villages didn't think highly of the daimyo of their country, after all, in name, the 5 major ninja villages still belonged to the 5 daimyo. No matter what, the 5 major ninja villages must find ways to protect the daimyo of their country. Now that the 5 daimyo are hiding in the Land of Fire, in order to ensure the safety of the 5 daimyo, naturally, the nearest Woodleaf village of the Land of Fire will provide shelter for the 5 daimyo. In this way, Watergate naturally obtained a legitimate reason to preserve the strength of Woodleaf village. Preserving a part of the strength of his own ninja village will undoubtedly make Woodleaf village the #1 ninja village in the ninja world after the battle. Minato has already made plans after the battle. With Konoha's strength far beyond the other villages, Minato will try his best to maintain the relationship between the 5 Great Shinobi Village Alliance, making Konoha the leader of the 5 Great Shinobi Village Alliance, and making Konoha the leader of the 5 Great Shinobi Village Alliance. Now, Watergate will never allow Nangongja to destroy his plan. After all, if Nangongja continues like this, it is very likely that he will directly kill all the ninjas of the 5 major ninja villages. At that time, although the 5 major ninja villages will no longer be a hindrance, but without the restraint of the major ninja villages, there will be chaos everywhere, and it will be more troublesome. Chapter 744. Watergate had his own plans, how could Nangongja not have his own plans? When he was still young, Nangongja's greatest wish was to be able to live with his sister Nangong-ro, and live a carefree life without worrying about food or clothing. But as he grew older, Nangongja found out more and more how difficult it was to realize his seemingly simple wish. It wasn't that he didn't have enough money, but in this world, there was no such thing as a pure land. As long as he pursued this wish, then he had no choice but to continuously increase his own strength in order to protect his own life. As time passed, his life became more than just himself and his sister. Mashiro and Little Linger quietly blended into Nangongja's life, and sneaked into the depths of Nangongja's heart. But because of Mashiro's identity and Linger's family enmity, Nangongja had no choice but to directly confront Danzo and Akatsuki. And in order to protect himself and increase the strength of his own forces, Nangongja had no choice but to take Heavenly Tribulation sword and barge into Blood-Robed Pavilion. While making Blood-Robed Pavilion become his own force, Nangongja's extremely responsible temperament also made the burden on his shoulders even heavier. Every choice that Nangongja made seemed to be his own decision, but it was also one matter after another, one person after another constantly forcing Nangongja to walk down this path. Nangongja didn't reject the burden that appeared on his shoulders, but Nangongja wasn't willing to let these burdens bind him, and let him live a life that he disdained. Even if he became the ruler of the world, so what if his words were like laws? So what if he had countless beauties? Nangongja actually hoped that he could enjoy the morning sun, the evening clouds, the spring breeze, the summer rain, the autumn leaves, and the winter sun. When the clouds disperse, the flowers wilt and bloom, I will not change, I will still be a young man here. Watergate, in fact, I am different from you. Although Watergate and Nangongja were still fighting at the moment, after hearing Watergate's words, Nangongja's eyes couldn't help but reveal an indescribable emotion. Although I didn't grow up in Woodleaf Village, I have naturally heard about you. Since you were a child, you were an outstanding ninja. You were accepted as a disciple by Jiraiya, became famous in the ninja world, and became the Golden Flash that everyone feared like a tiger, and inherited the position of the fourth Hokage. Although there were all kinds of hardships, in the end, you were constantly moving forward step by step, and what supported you was nothing else but the ambition in your heart. Others said that Namikaze Watergate was a kind person, but if everything he did was carefully analyzed with the greatest malice, wouldn't it be very scheming? The contact with Uzumaki Shinakushina, who was the Nine Tails column force, made him enter the eyes of the Woodleaf leaders. After Uzumaki Shinakushina was kidnapped, he rescued her at all costs, made her fall in love with him, and directly made the Woodleaf leaders want to win you over. You are just an orphan, you don't have a Kekkei Genkai, and you don't have any family power. If you want to become stronger and change your destiny, you can only rely on the most powerful force in Konoha, the Hokage clan, and you have obviously succeeded. If I guessed correctly, you must have a detailed plan in your heart after the war is over to rely on the power of Woodleaf to put pressure on several other ninja villages, and then make them surrender or even directly become vassals of Woodleaf, right? The fourth Hokage, Namikaze Watergate. As a leader, the first quality he had to possess was to not be stingy in guessing anyone's intentions with his greatest malice. What Nangongja said was his own speculation, but when he heard it in Watergate's ears, it was like a needle piercing his heart. As long as Nangongja said these words loudly and spread to the ears of the other Kage, then no matter how much they believe in his character, they will definitely have concerns about all his actions, and then directly collapse the fragile balance of the war. But Nangongja didn't say these words out loud, instead, he controlled the volume in a range that only the two of them could hear. For a while, Namikaze Watergate looked at Nangongja with a bit of confusion. This battle may seem like I'm fighting for more living space for the Blood Garment Pavilion, but that's just a secondary goal. If you don't believe me, just watch. With that, Nangongja also directly changed his posture in the process of the battle, neither attacking nor dodging, but simply guiding Watergate's eyes to look around the battlefield. Looking at the ninjas and internal force practitioners who were fighting endlessly, for a while, Watergate's heart suddenly had a little understanding, but this clear understanding was also wrapped in a fog, and it was difficult to distinguish. Although this is a bloody battle, Watergate, don't you find that the ninjas of the 5 major ninja villages are more excited and their fighting spirit is more vigorous than before when they fought against Uchiha Obito, Uchiha Madara, and Otsutsuki Kagaya? The more vigorous the fighting spirit is, the more united they will be in their own camp. Now I am giving the ninjas a group a chance, and I am also giving the internal force practitioners a chance. How strong is a ninja's direct killing intent? I don't need to say it, you should be very clear about it. As long as there is a disagreement, ninjas who kill without saying anything is definitely the mainstream of this ninja world. But the ninja profession itself is a fighting profession, these killing intents can't be resolved in a way other than fighting, they can only choose endless internal strife. But now, I've given you a new choice. I've set a goal that everyone will reject, so that you can tie yourselves together and no longer engage in meaningless internal strife. Although it's not true peace, it has divided the 5 nations who have been attacking and fighting each other endlessly into 2 camps, internal force cultivators and ninjas. It is too difficult to conquer, instead of conquering, isn't it better to cooperate in disguise? Chapter 745. Naruto pursues mutual understanding between people, so that everyone can release their greatest kindness to others, and then give birth to peace between people. Sasuke pursues the emergence of a powerful force above everyone, using absolute rational laws to bind everyone, and by managing the evil in people's hearts to stimulate the good in people's hearts. Minato's goal was to conquer other forces through agreements, alliances, and their own strength. Gradually, through various means, they would eliminate these hidden dangers. Slowly, the world would change quietly. As long as there was enough time, the whole world would become one, and it would not be impossible for them to become a unified country. Unlike Naruto, Sasuke, and Watergate, Nangongzhi pursues a kind of balance, instead of the so-called peace that the three of them yearn for. Nangongzhi hopes to directly establish two camps in the ninja world, internal strength cultivators and ninjas. When people have external enemies, they don't have to worry about internal problems. When ninjas and internal strength cultivators use all their efforts to fight against each other, as long as they don't have an absolute advantage, then neither side will easily make a move. After all, making the first move is not a wise choice in many cases. When we compare the pursuits of these four people, it is not difficult to find that Naruto and Sasuke's pursuits seem to be quite reasonable, but they are very general and abstract. The so-called good and evil need to be grasped by what scale, whether it is Naruto or Sasuke. In fact, they don't have such ability. The pursuit of the two of them, to put it bluntly, is actually a kind of beautiful vision. In the plans of Nangongzhi and Watergate, the two of them are more detailed about what they want to do. Whether it is the pursuit of peace or the pursuit of balance, the two of them have seriously thought about the feasibility and made detailed plans. Since he already knew Nangongzhi's plan, Minato instantly understood why Nangongzhi would lead the disciples of the Blood Clothing Pavilion to wage war against him. Moreover, it looked like they would fight to the death. Looking at the Blood Cloak Pavilion disciples on the battlefield, most of them were already around 30 years old. Although 30 years old was still the prime of a warrior's life, unless they were exceptionally talented, there was not much room for improvement. Although Watergate doesn't know much about the Blood Cloak Pavilion, as a large force, the Blood Cloak Pavilion must have its own talent training mechanism. Watergate can be sure that Nangongzhi must have left the seeds of the Blood Cloak Pavilion. Whether they win or lose this battle with the ninja allied forces, these seeds will quickly germinate. By consuming the existing strength of the Blood Cloak Pavilion, the hatred between the Blood Cloak Pavilion and the ninja allied forces will become stronger because of the killing, and then this hatred will be turned into spring water to water the seeds, making the Blood Cloak Pavilion and the ninja allied forces completely opposite each other. Nangongzhi's move is to drag the ninja allied forces down with him. As long as you still have to fight, then you will have to act according to my plan. Nangongzhi's plan is so simple, but it is also impossible to find the possibility of stopping Nangongzhi. Now, as long as you look around casually on the battlefield, it is not difficult to find that whether it is the internal force cultivator or the ninja, at this moment, their eyes are red, controlled by their inner anger and killing intent. In this situation, even if Watergate directly ordered the ninja allied forces to retreat, it is already impossible. Moreover, the ninja allied forces is not a group led by Watergate, but a group jointly led by the Kage of the 5 major ninja villages. If Watergate casually gives orders, even if the other Kage don't have any conflicts with Watergate on the surface, who can guarantee that in the end, because of this little disharmony, who can guarantee that in the end, Watergate's overall plan will not be directly affected by Watergate's overall plan? The current situation is that Watergate has to walk on such a path designed by Nangongzhi, and then he can only watch everything deviate from his plan. Watergate stared closely at Nangongzhi with his eyes. He has to say that Nangongzhi's plan is indeed very subtle, but all plans have their own weaknesses after all. Now, the most important reason why Nangongzhi's plan is that the two sides on the battlefield are evenly matched, and there are a lot of casualties. But once the battle between Naruto and Sasuke, the 4 5 elements altar lords and the 6 Kage-level ninjas, and himself and Nangongzhi has a result, then this situation will be directly broken. If Watergate wants to break free from Nangongzhi's plan, in fact, what he needs to do is to use his most powerful strength to fight Nangongzhi. Futon, Rasengan. Although Watergate was hit by the Ash Kill during the battle with Otsutsuki Kagaya, he could only cut off one of his arms to prevent his body from being corroded by the Ash Kill aura. But even with only one arm left, Watergate's fighting ability and fighting awareness are still very strong. Chakra was poured into his calf, stimulating the muscles, and greatly improving his speed and flexibility. Chakra was injected into the Rasengan in his hand, which increased the destructive power of the Rasengan to a certain extent. Watergate directly held the Rasengan in his hand and attacked Nangongjia's position. Seeing that Watergate suddenly began to attack him without caring about the consumption of chakra, Nangongja was not surprised. After all, Watergate himself is also an extremely smart and slightly conceited person. In order to stop his plan, he will definitely do his best to attack him. Now that Watergate has lost his left arm, the most important impact on Watergate is that the flexibility shown by the Flying Thunder God Jutsu combined with various ninjutsu has disappeared. When fighting against Nangongja, he must not use flawed tactics to fight against Nangongja. Otherwise, he will definitely be pinned to the ground by Nangongja until he dies. If it is a head-on battle like this, Nangongja, as a Kendo Grandmaster, will naturally not have the slightest fear. He held the Heavenly Tribulation sword in his hand. His internal energy and sword energy were stored within the Heavenly Tribulation sword, but they were not released. While the Heavenly Tribulation sword was made of black material, a powerful and sharp aura was emitted from it. Chapter 746. Inner strength had a certain restraining effect on chakra. It could be considered as a type of energy that was slightly higher than chakra. On the other hand, sword chi was a variant of inner strength. While its aura was sharp, it naturally had a restraining effect on chakra. Nangongja's strength was supported by his vigorous inner strength and the sharp sword chi. If it wasn't for these two types of powerful and unique energy, the remaining sword moves and special abilities wouldn't have been able to display such abilities. His right hand held the sword and the hilt was close to his ear. The narrow dragon-shaped blade was close to Nangongja's cheek. It carried a slightly cold aura as it directly transmitted towards Nangongja's face. Nangongja tightly gripped the dragon-scaled sword hilt. Although it was a little rough, Nangongja's heart was filled with familiarity. The cracks on the body of the sword were constantly emitting azure and lustrous blue light intertwined with each other. Left foot in front, right foot behind. Nangongja stared closely at Watergate's path of attack. In his mind, he was constantly calculating how to receive Watergate's attacks. As Watergate got closer and closer to himself, Nangongja also calculated all the changes in Watergate's moves. Suddenly, the position of his left and right feet changed. His right foot fiercely stomped on the ground below him. Nangongja's entire body was like an arrow that left the bow as he directly charged towards Watergate's position. Under Nangongja's control, sword chi and inner strength were all concentrated on the tip of the Heaven's Calamity sword. The brilliant blue color directly left a conspicuous mark in the air. Nangongja's shoulder-length hair and the white and red embroidered robe on his body made clanking sounds because of the sudden increase in speed. His left hand turned into a sword finger and gently stroked the Heaven's Calamity sword in his hand. A gentle stroke seemed to have awakened the Heaven's Calamity sword. A large amount of light directly bloomed from the cracks on the Heaven's Calamity sword. Break! Nangongja directly sent the Heaven's Calamity sword out in his hand. It seemed like he didn't use any strength at all. But the moment the Heaven's Calamity sword was sent out, it directly issued an ear-piercing sound of tearing the air. The Heavenly Tribulation sword directly pierced towards the Rasengan in Minato's hand. Nangongja was aiming at the energy node in the Rasengan. Once such a node is destroyed, the Rasengan will also be destroyed, and even a large amount of chakra will directly disappear in the air. Seeing Nangongja directly stabbing towards himself with the sword, Watergate didn't shrink back and continued to attack Nangongja. The sword tip and the Rasengan were getting closer and closer. Watergate also directly activated the chakra in his body and directly injected it into the Rasengan in his hand. But when the chakra entered the Rasengan didn't show any signs of expansion. Instead, its aura became quite chaotic. Nangongja originally relied on his eyes to determine the energy node, but at this moment, it was directly covered by the chaotic chakra. Seeing Watergate's somewhat inexplicable change, Nangongja's heart was full of vigilance. Sure enough, after injecting a large amount of chakra to the Rasengan in his hand, Watergate directly pushed his hand forward. The Rasengan directly broke away from the shackles of his palm and rushed directly towards Nangong's direction. Its attack speed was even faster than Watergate's. It was too late to change his move now. Nangongja directly stabbed the Heaven's Calamity sword in his hand forward, piercing into the Rasengan that had turned into a white sphere. When the Heaven's Calamity sword was inserted into the Rasengan, Nangongja immediately sensed the state of the Rasengan through the body of the Heaven's Calamity sword. The large amount of chakra that Watergate injected just now actually messed up part of the original way of condensing the Rasengan, but with his own chakra, he separated the messed up part from the normal part. When Nangongja directly inserted his Heaven's Calamity sword into the Rasengan, it also directly broke the balance that Watergate barely maintained. The collision of the positive and negative energy will produce extremely powerful energy. At this moment, Nangongja bore the brunt of the impact directly. Reverse Chaos Rasengan. Previously, with the cooperation of Naruto, Watergate used the Immortal method, Wind Release, Yin-Yang Tai Chi Rasengan, a powerful move. After understanding the principle, Watergate also tried to use a simplified version of Yin-Yang Tai Chi in a Rasengan, which is the Reverse Chaos Rasengan that Nangongja was hit by now. The two types of energy maintained a fragile balance. The moment he approached the enemy, he wrapped his own chakra in the Reverse Chaos Rasengan, maintained the temporary balance of the Rasengan, and directly threw the Rasengan in the direction of the enemy. Without the support of the caster, the two types of chakra inside the Rasengan will directly collide and explode when it touches anything. Suffering a huge impact, Nangongja was directly hit in the air, but Nangongja's reaction was also very fast. He quickly adjusted his body in the air, and the Heaven's Calamity sword in his hand was directly inserted into the ground as a relay point. His whole body somersaulted in the air and stood directly on the ground. Sure enough, Watergate is the inventor of the Rasengan. It was obviously just an A-level ninjutsu, but he directly played with it. After various theories and chakra were integrated into the Rasengan, a brand new ninjutsu was born. It was impossible to guard against, and if you were not careful, you would be hit by it. However, Nangongja himself was also a person with rich combat experience. After seeing that Watergate was likely to be threatened by Watergate's Rasengan, Nangongja directly urged the sword energy and internal force in his body, forming a total of 36 sword energy swords floating behind him. Since Nangongja could condense sword energy swords, Nangongja has been concentrating on studying this kind of attack with great potential. Combining the ancient books in the Bloodcloak Pavilion and his own understanding of swordsmanship, Nangongja also created an attack method that was very suitable for his own sword habits and the nature of his sword energy, sword formation. The 36 sword energy swords floated behind him, constantly changing their position, coinciding with the number of 36 heavenly spirits. It was full of a mysterious aura, making it difficult for people to see the changes. Chapter 747. A light flashed in Nangongja's eyes as he quickly observed the current state of Minato's body as well as his surroundings. He held the Heaven's Disaster sword in his right hand and placed two of his fingers in front of his chest. Seizing the opportunity, he pointed his right hand in front of him and issued an order. Go! The moment Nangongja's order sounded, the constantly changing 36 sword chi swords floating behind Nangongja directly rushed in the direction of Watergate under Nangongja's control. Each of the 36 sword chi swords contained Nangongja's understanding of swordsmanship. Although these sword chi swords looked the same on the surface, each of them was different inside. Some of the sword chi swords were sharp, some were long, some were entangled, and some were indomitable. Different sword chi had different attack patterns, and the combination of the sword chi swords brought more possibilities to such a formation. After all, Nangongja's research on formations had not reached the so-called peak, and his control and understanding of the Heaven Dipper sword formation had not reached the peak. But with the various changes he had mastered, Nangongja believed that he could still defeat Watergate. Under Nangong's control, the sword chi swords quickly approached Watergate. As if they had their own consciousness, the 36 sword chi swords directly combined and attacked Watergate. Watergate looked at the 36 sword chi swords attacking him with a dignified expression. After all, Watergate saw with his own eyes the magical power of these sword chi swords under Nangong's control in the space gap and when he fought against Otsutsuki Kagaya. Now that Nangongja controlled the 36 sword chi swords to attack Watergate, and they seemed to have some unknown changes, Watergate instinctively became vigilant and serious. Watergate took out a flying thunder god kunai from his back. After confirming that he had seen the trajectory of the 36 sword chi swords, he directly threw the flying thunder god kunai in his hand. But when he threw it, Watergate used a very special hidden weapon technique. The flying thunder god kunai that was thrown out began to rotate around Watergate's body. Ninjutsu, Shuriken Shadow Clone Jutsu, Winding Technique. Although one of Watergate's arms was destroyed, the Shuriken Shadow Clone Jutsu was a relatively simple ninjutsu that Watergate was very familiar with. He could still use it in front of him in the form of a one-handed hand seal. The sound of explosions continued to sound, and the flying thunder god kunai directly appeared in the air out of thin air, and they also rotated around his body according to the winding technique that Watergate just used. Go! Watergate saw the opportunity and directly kicked a flying thunder god kunai, and the flying thunder god kunai instantly flew away under the great force of Watergate's foot. With the sound of breaking the air, the flying thunder god kunai directly rushed in the direction of the sword chi swords at a fast speed, and if the sword chi swords continued to fly along their own trajectory, they would be directly hit. Although Watergate didn't know much about the so-called formation, Watergate could find that when the 36 sword chi swords approached him and rotated around his body, there was a faint connection between these swords. Watergate could feel an extremely great sense of crisis from the combination of the 36 sword chi swords, but Watergate also understood through such a connection that as long as he could break one of the swords, the connection between the 36 sword chi swords would also be directly destroyed. Once the connection was destroyed, the 36 sword chi swords would become ordinary swords condensed from sword chi and internal strength. At that time, Watergate would have enough confidence to deal with these swords. Nangongja clearly controlled one of the sword chi swords in the sword formation that was about to be attacked by Watergate, but he didn't panic at all. Since Nangongja dared to use such a move, he naturally remembered the advantages and disadvantages of his move. The sword chi swords weren't so fragile. When he fought with Otsutsuki Kagaya before, it seemed that his sword chi swords would be directly destroyed as long as they were attacked with enough power, but that was also because the number of sword chi swords was too large, and Nangongja didn't have enough mental strength to control so many sword chi swords. Now, Nangongja only needed to control 36 sword chi swords. If he couldn't control them flexibly in such a situation, then Nangongja wouldn't be able to use the sword chi swords for so many years. If Watergate integrated his own various understandings into the wind-release ninjutsu Rasengan, then Nangongja's application of sword chi was rich to a terrifying extent. Both of them had extremely deep research in their own areas of expertise. The current battle was a competition between Nangongja and Watergate's ability to adapt to changing situations. The flying thunder god kunai directly rushed toward the sword chi swords with a whistling sound, but Nangongja didn't control the sword chi swords to dodge. Instead, he still let the sword chi swords maintain their original trajectory. Now that the Heavenly Dipper sword formation had just been set up, although each sword chi swords had established a connection with each other, it still lacked a little time to accumulate. At this time, the position of the sword chi swords was actually a kind of destruction to the sword formation, so Nangongja could only let Watergate attack his sword chi swords. But such a very obvious flaw, Nangongja naturally didn't study it. After countless experiments, Nangongja has mastered a very subtle way to resist the attacks of others on his sword chi swords. However, such an operation requires extremely precise control to be performed, otherwise, it is very likely to be self-defeating. This was the first time Nangongzhi used such a skill in a battle. Although he was very confident, he was also prepared for failure. He held the Heaven's Retribution sword tightly in his hand. Now, scatter. Seeing Watergate's flying thunder god Kanai approaching his sword chi swords infinitely, Nangongzhi's spirit was also highly concentrated. He saw the opportunity and directly displayed the skill he had honed. Chapter 748. With Nangongzhi's command, the small sword that was attacked directly turned into wisps of sword energy and internal strength, forming an energy ball in the air. The energy ball wasn't a physical entity, so the flying thunder god Kanai directly flew through the energy ball. Seeing that the small sword energy had turned into an energy ball under Nangongzhi's control, Watergate was quite surprised. But after all, Watergate could only try to break the small sword energy now, so Watergate could only use the same method to continuously attack the 36 small sword energy around him. However, this time, Watergate didn't attack one small sword energy. Instead, he attacked more small sword energy. 2, 3, 4, and even more small sword energy were constantly attacked by the flying thunder god Kanai controlled by Watergate. But no matter how Watergate attacked, all the small sword energy attacked by Watergate turned into energy balls formed by sword energy and internal strength. After avoiding all of Watergate's attacks, these energy balls turned into small sword energy again. The energy between these 36 small sword energy was still tightly connected, constantly perfecting the 36 Tiangang sword formation. Feeling the aura from the Tiangang sword formation, the light in Nangongzhi's eyes became more and more condensed. At this moment, there was even a feeling that the light in his eyes was about to break through the bindings of his eyes. Tiangang sword formation complete. Controlling the Tiangang sword formation to turn into an energy ball again and again to dodge Watergate's attacks consumed a lot of Nangongzhi's energy and mental strength. But since he had already used his move, he naturally had to make sure that his move was effective enough. Nangongzhi almost endured the huge consumption of energy to maintain the Tiangang sword formation. Now that such a huge consumption of energy had finally been successfully condensed, Nangongzhi's heart was actually quite relaxed. After all, as the controller of the Tiangang sword formation, no one knew better than Nangongzhi how powerful and infinite the Tiangang sword formation was. Nangongzhi held the catastrophe sword in one hand and the sword hilt in the other, but this did not hinder Nangongzhi's control of the Tiangang sword formation at all. Under Nangongzhi's control, the 36 sword auras began to constantly change their positions. The sword auras of different attributes constantly cooperated with each other to attack Watergate. Seeing the 36 sword auras attacking him, Watergate immediately reacted. He constantly relied on his physical fitness and reflexes to dodge the attacks from the sword auras. In the beginning, Watergate could still dodge the sword aura's attacks, but after all, a person's physical strength and energy were limited. Moreover, through the constant combination of the sword auras, each attack toward Watergate was different and had different changes. Finally, under the constant attacks of the Tiangang sword formation, Watergate's physical strength reached a limit. His body also became sluggish because of the decrease in physical strength. Qi. Because of the decrease in his reflexes, Watergate's body was finally directly attacked by the sword auras. Although the injury was not a vital part and the wound was not deep, the sword auras of different attributes in the sword auras directly poured into Watergate's body, wantonly destroying Watergate's body. In terms of pure offensive power, the sword formation itself was naturally not as powerful as the sword aura dragon, sword aura torrent, and sky sword. However, the advantage of the sword formation was that its consumption was not as large as the three powerful attacks. Moreover, the sword formation's ability to trap the enemy was extremely important when fighting an enemy with a normal body size. Once the enemy was entangled to the limit of his physical strength, then as long as he could not break the Tiangang sword formation, he would only be struggling at death's door. Now that Watergate had been attacked, his body would become weaker because of the destruction caused by the sword auras. The weak body would cause him to suffer more damage. Such a vicious cycle would become a quagmire, directly dragging Watergate into the abyss of failure. In the battlefield, the ninjas and internal force cultivators, the 4-5 elements altar masters, and the 6 Kage-level experts who were fighting saw the situation of Watergate and Nangongzhi at this moment. When they saw that Watergate was bound by the sword formation and was injured, the hearts of the ninjas and the 6 Kage-level experts of the ninja allied forces sank at this moment. After all, the current situation was too balanced. As long as any aspect collapsed, the situation of the entire war would change. After the disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion and the 5 Elements Altar Masters saw that Nangongzhi had a great advantage, they were also excited. Their nerves, which had become numb because of the constant attacks, became active again at this moment. For a time, the power of the Blood Cloak Pavilion on the entire battlefield began to boil. Although his body was trapped in the Tiangang sword formation, Watergate could still observe the situation on the battlefield. From the beginning of this battle until now, the ninjas and the ninja allied forces, from the peak-level experts to the ordinary ninjas, had become tired because of the battle with Uchiha Obito, Uchiha Madara, and Otsutsuki Kagaya. They were all trying their best to be evenly matched with the Blood Cloak Pavilion, who had new blood joining them. But now, because he was trapped in the sword formation and seemed to be on the verge of collapse, the situation of the entire battlefield had changed. Watergate's fairness made it impossible for him to accept this reality. Watergate's eyes were red as he stared at Nangongzhi's sword auras that were constantly attacking him, trying to find some patterns in it and find some ways to break the formation. But the more he looked, the more confused Watergate was. Because he was distracted by observing the operation pattern of the sword formation, a few more wounds appeared on his body. The physical pain and mental pressure gradually made Watergate's mood become a little restless and impetuous. At this moment, Watergate had also given up on observing the sword formation and attacked all the sword auras that were attacking him. Looking at the sword auras that were flying towards him, Watergate's eyes flashed with a trace of fierceness. He directly took the attack of a sword aura, and then directly kicked the other sword aura that was attacking him away. Nangongzhi also didn't expect that Watergate, who had always been calm, would directly attack his sword auras at this moment, but he quickly recovered his control of the sword auras that were knocked away. Chapter 749. Although Watergate only did this out of anger, after Watergate kicked away a small sword, he saw a scene that he didn't expect. After the small sword was kicked away by Watergate, it actually collided with another small sword. When the two small swords collided, they actually left a scratch on each other's body. Instead of turning into two energy balls, they didn't affect each other at all. Seeing this scene, Watergate's heart suddenly moved. Just now, he kept attacking the small sword with Flying Thunder God Kunai, but none of them succeeded. He couldn't even block the chi between the small sword. But now, it seemed like even though Nangongzhi could control the small sword aura and turn it into a ball of energy made up of sword aura and internal strength to allow ordinary attacks to penetrate it, this ability seemed to be ineffective in the face of attacks from the small sword aura of the same origin. The fact that they were of the same origin meant that the energy level and attack power of the sword energy swords were of the same level. According to what was said before, the 36 sword energy swords contained Nangongzhi's understanding of the way of the sword. Although the 36 sword energy swords looked similar, they were fundamentally different. Differences would naturally lead to conflicts. Once these conflicts were intentionally expanded, there would naturally be a way to break the situation. Although Watergate's body had become quite weak due to the invasion of the sword chi at this moment, it was still within the range that he could withstand. After discovering such a worthy loophole, Watergate also made up his mind to give it a try. Minato looked at the small swords of sword chi that were swimming around him. Holding a Flying Thunder God Kunai in his hand, he directly rushed towards the 36 small swords of sword chi. At this moment, Watergate no longer relied on his flexible body to dodge the attack. Instead, he directly rushed towards the small sword Qi with the flying thunder god kunai in his hand. Nangongzhe was a little surprised that Watergate suddenly changed from defense to offense. However, such a change of defense to offense was not a good move when facing the sword formation. The sword formation itself was a kind of formation. It was rooted in the earth and welcomed the enemy with thousands of changes. In other words, the formation itself was a kind of attack method. The more intense the enemy's resistance, the more the formation's power would be stimulated. At this moment, Watergate was holding the flying thunder god kunai in his hand to block every small sword Qi that approached him. Although it did not directly destroy the Tiangang sword formation, it brought a certain amount of pressure to Nangongzhe, who was controlling the Tiangang sword formation, who had consumed a lot of energy. Watergate was attacking with his flying thunder god kunai. Nangongzhe was also controlling the Tiangang sword formation to constantly attack Watergate. Now the two of them were riding a tiger and there was no way to stop. In order to end this battle, one of them must lose the ability to fight. However, compared to Watergate, Nangongzhe still had his own advantages. After all, the Tiangang sword formation was a long-range attack method. Although it caused a certain amount of physical strength and energy consumption to Nangongzhe, it did not touch the root of the attack. From the beginning to the end, Nangongzhe had reserved some strength to protect himself. Watergate was different. At this moment, because he lost one of his arms, Watergate could not use many ninjutsu. The strongest ninjutsu he could use at this time was Rasengan, but the attack range of Rasengan itself was also greatly limited. Even if Watergate desperately used chakra to maintain the stability of Rasengan, the Rasengan could only extend about 30 centimeters forward at most. Such a distance was not very significant when fighting against a flexible existence like the Tiangang sword formation, and it would cause a lot of energy consumption. Being in the middle of the Tiangang sword formation, which had a powerful offensive ability, any small mistake would allow the Tiangang sword formation to take advantage of the loophole and attack his body. In comparison, the danger that Minato was facing was much greater than that of Nangongzhe. Watergate's slightly reckless frontal attack had a negative effect on Watergate. After the number of collisions with the sword Qi sword increased, Watergate's physical strength obviously decreased again. The sword Qi sword constantly left wounds on Watergate's body. At this moment, Watergate's body was almost completely covered in blood, with a dark red color. If it weren't for the fact that Watergate's physical strength as a Kage tier expert was far superior to ordinary people, he would have directly fallen to the ground, unable to move. Looking at the increasing number of wounds on Watergate's body, Nangongzhe's heart couldn't help but tighten. After all, Nangongzhe's original plan was only to let the internal force practitioners and ninjas reach a nearly balanced opposition, letting the two compete and cooperate to promote the development of the whole world and make the world more stable. However, if he really killed Watergate here, then the relationship between the ninjas and the internal force practitioners would no longer be in a competitive relationship, but an irreconcilable one. This would definitely disrupt his overall plan, so he was a little hesitant when he made the move. Although Nangongzhe didn't want to directly kill Watergate, for Watergate, the Blood Cloak Pavilion represented by Nangongzhe was a huge stumbling block in his plan. After all, internal force practitioners and ninjas were not in the same system at all, and their attitudes and values were very different. Even if Nangongzhe really retreated and agreed to his conditions, the Blood Cloak Pavilion was still a ticking time bomb that could explode at any time. If possible, he wanted to eradicate the internal force practitioners as much as possible. The internal force practitioners themselves were the remnants of the historical flood, and they had only survived to this day by chance. Since they were garbage, naturally, he would have to clean them up properly. It was really not a good thing to always stay here and be an eyesore. After noticing that Nangongzhe's sword attack had slowed down a little, Watergate also seized the opportunity extremely quickly. He directly threw the flying thunder god kunai in his hand directly to attract Nangongzhe's attention, and then one of his hands gently brushed the ridge of a small sword. A black rune appeared on the sword for a moment, then disappeared again. After completing such a secret action, Watergate also immediately adjusted his posture. He stood in the middle of the Tiangang sword formation and looked at Nangongzhe, who was standing not far in front of him. His eyes looked at Nangongzhe as if he was facing death calmly. Chapter 750. Chief Nangongzhan, I know your purpose, and you should also know mine. People who walk different paths cannot make plans together. You and I have chosen two different paths, so we naturally have to be prepared to fight to the death. Now you are hesitating to attack me, but I won't relax just because I attack you. Since you want to fight, then fight with all your strength. Otherwise, won't you lose the title of Chief of the Blood Cloth Pavilion and Ninja World? Looking at Nangongzhan, Watergate said as if he was facing death. Before Nangongzhan became the Chief of the Blood Cloth Pavilion, he was a swordsman. For his own purpose, a little hesitation was forgivable for Nangongzhan, but as a swordsman, when fighting, his heart was full of intrigue, and it was dusty for his sword heart. Sometimes, ninjas and internal force cultivators were very flexible people, especially Nangongzhan, who had experience as a ninja. Although he didn't admire the unscrupulous methods used by ninjas to achieve their goals, he didn't reject it either. Nangongzhan himself also used a lot of slightly sinister moves when fighting with others. But even if the moves were sinister, Nangongzhan still had a clear conscience, because he was almost omnipotent in battle, and he didn't let down the long sword in his hand. But now, Nangongzhan's heart was full of his own plan. It was fine when no one mentioned it, but after Watergate directly opened it, Nangongzhan's mind was quite turbulent, and even his hand holding the Heaven's Disaster sword was slightly trembling at this moment. The most fatal thing for a swordsman is that his sword heart is covered in dust. Once the sword heart is no longer bright, then no matter how strong his internal force is, how sharp his sword energy is, and how brilliant his sword moves are, the sword he used will be a sword without a soul. Such a sword is no harm to ordinary enemies, but when dealing with a strong person like Watergate, who stood at the peak of the ninja world, a sword without a soul is no different from waving a bamboo pole. Even Watergate himself didn't expect that his words would cause Nangongzhan's sword heart to be turbulent. At this moment, Nangongzhan's face was bright and dark, and the expression on his face was constantly changing, which looked very strange. Looking at Nangongzhan's strange performance, Watergate didn't stay in place, but directly rushed towards Nangongzhan and launched an attack on Nangongzhan. At this moment, because of the turbulent sword heart in his body, Nangongzhan couldn't keep his mind clear, and his body was almost acting according to instinct. After sensing Watergate's attack towards himself, Nangongzhan's body at this moment almost instinctively controlled the 36 sword energy swords to attack Watergate. Without Nangongzhan's fine control, although the 36 Heavenly Dipper sword formation was powerful, it was no longer flawless, and there were some big and small flaws. Looking at the large number of sword energy swords attacking him, he also constantly changed his body shape to judge the current attack pattern of the Heavenly Dipper sword formation. After a short observation, Watergate had already determined that the Heavenly Dipper sword formation was extremely rough and integrated into a whole without Nangongzhan's fine control, just like the Sword Energy Dragon and Sword Energy Torrent before attacking him. Because the Heavenly Dipper sword formation was made up of 36 sword energy swords, there was more or less a delay in the control of each sword. After making a clear judgment of the situation, Minato's face finally revealed a look of victory. Although he didn't know why he directly confused Nangongzhan, there was no doubt that Watergate had achieved his goal of making Nangongzhan attack him with all his strength, and because of Nangongzhan's mental confusion, Watergate's advantage became more obvious. Flying Thunder God Jutsu. Watergate instantly displayed his unique skill, Flying Thunder God Jutsu. If Rasengan was a test field for Watergate to test his ninjutsu talent, then Flying Thunder God Jutsu was Watergate's real trump card. The ninja world had lasted for countless years, but there were only a few people who could successfully practice space ninjutsu. If Watergate had to choose a ninjutsu that he was good at, then Watergate would definitely choose Flying Thunder God Jutsu, which made his whereabouts unpredictable and created countless miracles compared to Rasengan. The sword energy swords that were touched by Watergate directly appeared with the Flying Thunder God mark engraved by Watergate, and Watergate's body instantly appeared beside the sword energy swords. Based on Nangongji's judgment, the small swords controlled by Nangongji instinctively used the enemy's aura to attack. Now that Nangongji had appeared beside one of the small swords, they would naturally turn around and attack Nangongji's position. Just when all these sword energy swords turned around to attack Watergate, Watergate saw one of them, and quickly engraved his Flying Thunder God mark on the sword ridge, and then immediately used Flying Thunder God Jutsu to come to the place where he used Shadow Clone Shuriken Jutsu. At this moment, it was already too late for the small swords to change the direction of their attacks. The first small sword that had been engraved with the Flying Thunder God imprint by Watergate was directly torn to shreds by the many small swords with different characteristics. After seeing that the sword energy swords were directly destroyed instead of turning into a ball of energy to dodge the attack like before, Watergate finally confirmed that his attack method was effective. As a result, he repeated the same trick. Again and again, he would come to the side of the Flying Thunder God imprint. Then, he would grab a sword and inscribe the Flying Thunder God imprint on it. After that, he would use the Flying Thunder God imprint to come to his Flying Thunder God kunai and wait for the next action. Although there were 36 sword energy swords, under the constant self-attack, such a number was really not enough. Within a few minutes, the Tiangang sword formation that originally imprisoned Watergate with brilliant power was only left with 3 shaky sword energy swords floating in the air. Without the almost perfect cooperation and the traction of chi between each other, a few sword energy swords were really not enough to catch Watergate's attention. Watergate suddenly sped up, and directly came to the side of the 3 sword energy swords. Reaching out his hand, Watergate crushed the 3 sword energy swords. Chapter 751. In the end, the winner is still me, isn't it? Nangong Zhuzhan. Although his body was full of scars, and a lot of blood even soaked his clothes, but the person standing here now is himself, and Nangongji, who was fighting with him at this moment, has been unable to maintain his consciousness because of his surging kenshin. He won this battle, and the future of the ninja world will be decided by him. Watergate's heart was extremely proud. After all, his victory almost laid the foundation of an era. Nangongji, the only one who had the ability to compete with him, is now directly crippled. As long as he can go up and kill him, this shinobi world's Blood Cloak Pavilion will only be a small character submerged in the torrent of history. And he, Minato, will become the founder of a new world. Even if it's 100 years, 1,000 years, or even 10,000 years later, as long as the shinobi world's heritage is not cut off, his achievements will be remembered forever. No one doesn't like fame and fortune, because as long as people have desire, they will definitely have something to ask for. Watergate usually seems to suppress all his selfishness, and all his actions are for the greater public interest, but to a certain extent, such behavior is not also integrated his selfishness into the public interest, and after the public interest is achieved, his selfishness will also be achieved. This way of achieving selfishness will never be criticized by people, and will even be admired by countless people because of the process of achieving the combination of public interest and selfishness. Why can the ninja allied forces be smoothly formed? One is naturally because of the external factors of Uchiha Obito's futile attempt to resurrect the Jubi and pull the entire ninja world into the virtual world, and the other is also because Watergate, who is in the enemy camp but is respected by countless people, took the lead and even voluntarily gave up part of the interests of Woodleaf Village to unify everyone. In the previous battle, it is not difficult to find that most of the subordinate teams of the ninja allied forces are managed by Woodleaf ninjas, and almost all the orders issued by the ninja allied forces headquarters are issued with the support of Watergate. It seems that the highest commander of the ninja allied forces is the 4th Raikage, but Watergate has become a huge force standing behind the ninja allied forces and controlling everyone. At this moment, the expression on Watergate's face is relatively calm, but in Watergate's eyes are filled with an extremely arrogant and sharp emotion. Taking out a flying thunder god kunai from his ninja tool bag, Watergate slowly walked in the direction of Nangongzhe. At this moment, the expression on Nangongzhe's face is still very uncertain, and it is constantly changing. Obviously, he has not yet escaped from the mental chaos. Watergate looked at the chaotic Nangongzhe, and his eyes flashed with a trace of fierceness, and he clamped the flying thunder god kunai in his hand on Nangongzhe's neck. The sharp kunai was tightly attached to the skin on Nangongzhe's neck, and a bloodstain instantly appeared on Nangongzhe's neck. A drop of blood condensed from the bloodstain on Nangongzhe's neck and fell to the ground along the edge of the kunai. The scarlet blood droplets fell to the ground and bloomed into a beautiful blood flower. Leader. Although they were fighting with 6 Kage-tier ninjas, the 4 5 Elements Altar Lords of the Blood Robe Pavilion were still paying attention to the battle between Nangongzhe and Watergate. Originally, when Nangongzhe used the Heavenly Dipper sword formation to directly trap Watergate, everyone in the Blood Robe Pavilion was very excited, but the situation on the battlefield changed rapidly. Suddenly, Nangongzhe's powerful sword formation was directly broken by Watergate, and they didn't know why they fell into chaos. Now, they couldn't even react to the kunai on their necks, so how could they not feel anxious in such a situation? Before Nangongzhe, although the Blood Robe Pavilion couldn't be said to be weak, but as a hidden force, the resources they could obtain were limited, and their influence on the ninja world was almost non-existent. After Nangongzhe became the leader, he worked hard to develop the Blood Robe Pavilion. Originally, the Blood Robe Pavilion could only hide in a corner of the ninja world, but in just a few years, it directly turned into a powerful force second only to the 5 major ninja villages in the ninja world. Many small countries were also infiltrated by the Blood Robe Pavilion and became their subordinate forces. The scope of their influence continued to increase, and their influence on the ninja world continued to increase. The medical centers under Aoki Altar were opened almost all over the ninja world. While treating ordinary people and spreading the reputation of the Blood Robe Pavilion, they also searched for people with talent to join the Blood Robe Pavilion on a large scale, providing fresh blood for the Blood Robe Pavilion. The investigation organization of Azure Water Altar was also spread out in a large area, becoming the eyes and ears of the Blood Robe Pavilion. The Thick Earth Altar and Scarlet Flame Altar also received a lot of tasks in the ninja world, accumulating a lot of wealth for the development of the Blood Robe Pavilion. The Sharp Gold Altar guarded the headquarters of the Blood Robe Pavilion under the leadership of Mashiro and constantly cultivated new forces. It seems that the Blood Robe Pavilion has been established, but as the Lords of the 5 Elements Altar, second only to Nangongzhe, Aoki, Thick Earth, Azure Water, and Scarlet Flame knew better than anyone that the current Blood Robe Pavilion was still far from enough. The system has just been formed, and there must be a lot of loopholes in it, and people's hearts are unpredictable. When the Blood Robe Pavilion is expanding, there will definitely be various internal problems. Some problems can be solved by the Lords of the 5 Elements Altar, but some problems are far from enough. Once something happens to Nangongzhe in this battle, the 4 Lords of the 5 Elements Altar will not compete with each other for the position of the head. They will elect Mashiro, who has been vigorously cultivated by Nangongzhe, to take the position. Just the fact that Mashiro's strength is not enough to change the minds of the people in the Blood Robe Pavilion. When the big and small forces in the ninja world saw that the top powerhouses of the Blood Robe Pavilion no longer exist, they naturally couldn't suppress the desire in their hearts and began to attack the Blood Robe Pavilion. The more powerful the force, the more ambitious people there will be. If Nangongzhe can be in power for 10 or even 20 years and completely perfect the system of the Blood Robe Pavilion, it will naturally be fine, but the current Blood Robe Pavilion can't do without Nangongzhe. This battle can be lost directly, but Nangongzhe must not have any problems as the head of the Blood Robe Pavilion, otherwise, the Blood Robe Pavilion will have no way to survive and can only become a vassal of others. Chapter 752. No matter what, no matter how much sacrifice we have to make, we must rescue Chief Nangongzhe. Otherwise, the blood-robed pavilion will be in danger. Whether it was the 5 elements altar lords or the ordinary disciples of the blood-robed pavilion, they all had the same thought in their minds. They must rescue Nangongzhe, the man who had led the blood-robed pavilion to become stronger. Winning this battle was naturally a cause for celebration. Even if they had suffered a defeat, the Blood Garment Pavilion would still become stronger under the leadership of Nangongzhe, who had great talent and vision. However, if Nangongzhe, the leader of the resurgence of the Blood Garment Pavilion, fell here, the Blood Garment Pavilion would never be able to rise again. The 4-5 elemental altar lords directly charged towards Nangongzhe without caring about the consequences of their actions. They forced away the 6 shadow rank experts who were fighting against them to retreat. The 6 Kage-level experts used their respective ninjutsu to constantly attack the 4-5 elements altar lords who had their backs facing them. However, no matter how much damage they suffered, the 4-5 elements altar lords still rushed toward Nangongzhe. Countless ordinary blood-robed pavilion disciples on the battlefield also shook off the ninjas who were fighting them at all costs and rushed toward Nangongzhe. They knew that their strength might not be enough, but they could still help Nangongzhe block the attack of the 4th Hokage, Bofeng Watergate. The reason they rushed forward was not to fight anyone, but to help Nangongzhe block the attack, so that this person who brought hope to the blood-robed pavilion could continue to live and become the hope of the blood-robed pavilion. Looking at the blood-robed pavilion disciples rushing toward them, Bofeng Watergate's eyes involuntarily flashed with a hint of emotion. What kind of magic did Nangongzhe have that could make so many people in the blood-robed pavilion want to save him even at the cost of their own lives? If one day he was in a different situation, and someone put a knife on his neck, how many people in Konoha would rush to him regardless of life and death to fight for a chance of survival? To be honest, Watergate could only count them with one hand. After all, the Woodleaf village was not his private force. There were large and small families in the Woodleaf village, and there were also elders who competed for power. For these families and elders, he was just a force to protect the ninja village, but it was not a necessary force. Even if he died for any reason, there would be someone to replace him. He was not irreplaceable, so naturally, there would not be so many people who would risk their lives for him. Headmaster Nangong, you can go in peace. Even I am a little envious of the current you. Looking at Nangongzhe, who was held by the flying thunder god kunai on his neck, Watergate said with a bit of envy, but it was precisely because of this that Watergate was more determined to kill Nangongzhe. The blood-robed pavilion with Nangongzhe's existence was like a house with a main beam. No matter how the outside world blows, as long as the main beam is still there, the house will not collapse easily. With such an unknown and uncontrollable blood-robed pavilion in the ninja world, it was very unfavorable for Watergate's plan. Therefore, Watergate could only do his best to eliminate Nangongzhe, the pillar of the blood-robed pavilion, to pave the way for his plan. After Watergate made a decision in his heart, he did not hesitate at all. He directly used the flying thunder god kunai to leave a deep wound on Nangongzhe's neck. The wound was not very deep, but it directly cut the artery on Nangongzhe's neck. A lot of blood directly sprayed out from the wound on Nangongzhe's neck under the strong pressure of the heart. Watergate, who was very close to Nangongzhe, was also splashed by the blood spurting out from Nangongzhe's neck, but Watergate still didn't dodge and let the blood sprinkle on his body. It was not difficult to see from Watergate's eyes that he actually enjoyed the feeling of being splashed by Nangongzhe's blood. Chair-sama, how could, revenge for Chair-sama. Revenge. After seeing Nangongzhe's aorta directly cut open and a lot of blood spurting out, every blood-robed pavilion disciple's eyes seemed to be soaked in the blood that sprayed out from Nangongzhe's body and became scarlet. For the ninja allied forces, they just destroyed their enemy. But for the blood-robed pavilion disciples, their hope was directly snuffed out by Watergate. At this moment, whether it was the 5 elements altar master or the ordinary blood-robed pavilion disciples, there was only one thought in their mind, and that was to directly kill Watergate here. Since this person directly wiped out their last hope, then they didn't need to be stingy with their lives. As long as they directly killed this person in this place, it could be regarded as letting Nangong rest in peace. Hatred did not make the blood-robed pavilion disciples crazy, but it made them more rational. Many blood-robed pavilion disciples consciously formed a nearly double concentric circle with Watergate as the center. The disciples who were good at defense were in the periphery to block the invasion of the ordinary ninjas and the 6 Kage-level experts, while the inner disciples who were good at attacking cooperated with the 5 elements Ultramaster to constantly attack Watergate's position. Watergate's body and spirit were extremely exhausted because of the battle with Nangongzhi, so he didn't dare to easily use the Flying Thunder God Jutsu to leave the encirclement of the blood-robed pavilion disciples. He could only passively defend against the attacks from the blood-robed pavilion disciples and wait for the help of the other members of the ninja allied forces. Nangongzhi's body was rescued by one of the 4 5 elements Ultramasters, Aoki Ultramaster, who was good at medical skills. He constantly checked Nangongzhi's body to see if there was any possibility of saving him. Aoki Ultramaster constantly transferred his internal strength into Nangongzhi's body. The internal strength in Nangongzhi's body was different from that of the 5 elements Ultramaster. It didn't have any attribute aura, but it was neutral and peaceful. Therefore, when Aoki Ultramaster's internal strength poured into Nangongzhi's body, it was constantly growing stronger. The moment Nangongzhi was injured, the dense internal energy in his body had already gathered around the wound and was constantly healing it. However, the healing ability of internal energy was only an instinctive action. In order to truly heal such a serious injury, Nangongzhi's consciousness had to be awakened and cooperate with it. Chapter 753. After checking that Nangongzhi's body still had a glimmer of vitality, as long as he could activate Nangongzhi's consciousness, he would be able to make Nangongzhi cooperate with him to heal his injuries. Aoki also immediately used the secret sound transmission method to inform Hotu, who was in charge of the defensive formation, and Akame and Bishui, who were in charge of the offensive formation. Hearing that Nangongzhi, who had led the blood cloth pavilion to become stronger step by step, at this moment, there was a glimmer of joy in their eyes. However, they did not immediately announce this news to the public. After all, once the ninjas of the ninja allied forces found out that Nangongzhi was still alive, they would definitely attack with all their strength. Although the people of the blood cloth pavilion were not afraid of fighting the ninja allied forces head-on, in order to buy enough time for Aoki to treat Nangongzhi, such news must be kept secret. Moreover, after seeing that Nangongzhi was seriously injured and seemed to have lost his life, the disciples of the blood cloth pavilion also began to fight the ninjas of the ninja allied forces with the will to die. As the saying goes, an army filled with grief is bound to win. The current disciples of the blood cloak pavilion were undoubtedly such a group of soldiers. The future hope of their branch was abruptly cut off by the ninjas of the ninja allied forces. Now, the disciples of the blood cloak pavilion were like crazy beasts, wanting to kill all the ninjas of the ninja allied forces. Eating their flesh and drinking their blood could not relieve the hatred in their hearts. With the power of such willpower, the blood cloth pavilion was able to buy more time under the siege of the ninja allied forces, so that the head of the blood cloth pavilion, Nangongzhi, who had brought glory to the blood cloth pavilion, could be revived. As long as they could save Nangongzhi, even if all the disciples of the blood cloth pavilion present died, it was not a bad deal for them. Although the blood garment pavilion did not spread the news that Nangongzhi could still be saved, in order to buy more time, the altar masters of the thick earth, crimson flame, and clear water altar, who were in charge of the formation, could not help but slow down the speed of the formation. As a result, the offensive power of the formation decreased and its defensive power increased. However, all the members of the ninja allied forces were in the middle of the battle. Facing the harder defensive formation, the ninjas of the ninja allied forces were in a frenzy at the moment. They just wanted to break the hard turtle shell and rescue the 4th Hokage, Namikaze Minato, who was trapped inside. And Watergate, who was in the center of the attack formation, although the pressure on his body had obviously weakened, Watergate's body was almost in a state of limit because of the continuous fighting. Previously, the disciples of the Blood Cloth Pavilion attacked Watergate with all their strength because of the anger of each other, and now, Watergate's physical and mental condition made it impossible for him to use the Flying Thunder God Jutsu to escape. Therefore, it could be said that Watergate had been in a state of high pressure just now. Now that the attack of the disciples of the Blood Cloth Pavilion suddenly weakened, not only did it not let Watergate find anything unusual, but it also made Watergate's high-tension nerves relax. All of a sudden, the external pressure lessened, and it was also reflected on his mind. As the Blood Garment Pavilion's offensive weakened, Shui Men's originally tense mind also relaxed a little. The sudden relaxation of his spirit also made the tiredness that Watergate had forcibly suppressed burst out. If it weren't for Watergate's strong will, he would have been directly impacted by the double fatigue from his body and spirit at this moment. The onlookers saw things more clearly than the onlookers. Originally, the 4-5 elements altar masters of the Blood Garment Pavilion had lost their rationality due to the anger in their hearts and became the so-called onlookers. However, when they learned that Nangongjia's life could still be saved, they broke away from their identity as onlookers and became calmer bystanders. They acted step by step in an incomparably calm manner just to achieve their own goals. However, such a concealment was actually just a slight concealment of the facts with the help of the conflict between the two sides. In any case, the formation that deliberately slowed down and strengthened its defensive power, and Old Man Aoki, who had been releasing a lot of internal force beside Nangongja, were 2 points that couldn't be ignored. There were also people in the ninja allied forces who understood. As the wartime staff officer of the ninja allied forces, Shikaku Nara quickly discovered that something was wrong. He directly used Yamanaka Inoichi's spiritual force to connect with all the main members of the ninja allied forces and directly told them his guess. After all, ninja was a profession that walked in the dark and accompanied by death. Such a group of people naturally couldn't all be reckless. On the contrary, most of them were cunning schemers or strategists. After hearing Shikaku Nara's analysis, most of the ninja's head that was blinded by blood also calmed down and began to observe the actions of the Blood Cloth Pavilion objectively. Once a person calmed down, many things would become flaws in the eyes of others. As long as one had a discerning eye, one could see that although the Blood Cloth Pavilion deliberately concealed it, they were trying their best to rescue Nangongja, who should have been directly taken away by the 4th Hokage, Watergate. Everyone in the ninja allied forces, I am Shikaku Nara from Woodleaf Village. I am the wartime commander of the ninja allied forces. After getting authorization from the 5 Kages of the ninja allied forces, I am now in charge of your unified command. Please follow my orders and charge towards the Blood Cloth Pavilion's formation. Don't let the sacrifice of many ninjas be in vain. Although Shikaku Nara didn't study the formation of the Blood Cloth Pavilion, he did have a very outstanding vision. After a long period of observation, he couldn't directly break the formation arranged by the Blood Cloth Pavilion, but he had already found some important nodes in the formation. With his identity, Shikaku Nara directly commanded the entire ninja allied forces, including the Sannin, Mizukage, Reikage, and Kazekage, these 6 Kage-level powerhouses. Under the command of Shikaku Nara, the ninjas of the allied forces constantly changed their formation and rushed towards the large formation formed by the disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion. Although they couldn't hit the nodes of the Blood Cloak Pavilion's formation every time, they could still hit them occasionally. Once they hit the nodes of the Blood Cloak Pavilion's formation, there would be a trace of panic. Although the flaws were quickly mended under the control of the earth, Shikaku Nara was also able to observe more of the mysteries of the formation from this trace of panic. Chapter 754. How high is Shikaku Nara's IQ? Even in the entire ninja world, only a few people can compare to him. Although Ho-Tu had an extremely high understanding of this array formation that combined both attack and defense, he was still restricted by the array formation itself. No matter how powerful a formation was, it had its own innate flaws. Although Ho-Tu had a steady personality, he was also a little inflexible. Although he could control the formation, he didn't have the temperament and ability to make up for the formation's flaws. And Shikaku Nara himself is one of the top sages of this world. Although he can't say that he can see the whole leopard with a single glance, but when he commanded the ninjas of the ninja allied forces to constantly attack the formation, Shikaku Nara almost grasped the changes of the formation. First team, move 400 meters to the southeast direction, everyone start preparing a large-scale attack ninjutsu, be ready to attack at any time under my command. Under the command of Shikaku Nara, a small team was automatically selected from the large number of ninjas in the allied ninjas army and moved directly in the direction specified by Shikaku Nara. Second team, third team, assemble in the southeast and southwest directions of the formation, and be ready to attack the formation of the Blood Cloak Pavilion at any time. The rest of the ninjas are on standby, be ready to listen to orders at any time. Shikaku Nara gave the order, and 2 more teams were directly formed and moved to the position he specified. Seeing that his layout has been basically completed, Shikaku Nara also cast his eyes on the constantly changing formation of the Blood Cloak Pavilion. The formation was constantly changing, and Shikaku Nara was constantly deducing the trend of the formation in his mind. Suddenly, the most suitable time to break the formation appeared. Second team, third team, listen to orders, use melee weapons to attack the formation of the Blood Cloak Pavilion. Seeing the ninjas of the allied ninjas army suddenly charging, Ho-Tu's heart trembled slightly. Others may not know, but as the person in charge of the defensive formation, Ho-Tu naturally knows that the formation is in a dangerous moment where the previous formation is automatically changing to the next one. And the allied ninjas army was able to directly attack the defensive formation at the right time. It seems that they have found the flaw in the formation. Although Ho-Tu doesn't have the ability and heart to make up for the flaws in the formation, his understanding of the formation has reached a peak. Since the formation has no defensive ability, Ho-Tu will naturally transfer his strength from other positions to defend the weak points of the formation. He took the bait. Looking at the changes in the formation of the Blood Cloak Pavilion, Shikaku Nara also understood the purpose of Ho-Tu's actions at this moment. And Shikaku Nara was waiting for such an opportunity. This is the key to break the formation of the formation. First team, everyone start to launch ninjutsu towards your right front, fully cover the area. The order was immediately transmitted to the minds of the ninjas of the allied ninjas under the blessing of Yamanaka Inoichi's mysterious spiritual secret jutsu. After hearing Shikaku Nara's order, the first team, who had been preparing for a long time, immediately began to launch ninjutsu. Flames rushed left and right in the air, the earth was constantly undulating and trembling, the air condensed into sharp blades, water rushed everywhere, and thunder and lightning spread everywhere. The ninjutsu of 5 attributes were directly displayed by many ninjas, and the 5 attributes of ninjutsu didn't hinder each other, and they even cooperated with each other to increase the power of ninjutsu. Powerful attacks directly rushed towards the formation of the Blood Cloak Pavilion. In the face of a large-scale ninjutsu attack, the disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion couldn't move freely because of the limited attack range and the restriction of the formation, so there were a large number of casualties. More importantly, the forces that Ho-Tu transferred to surround the node were intercepted by the allied ninjas' ninjutsu attack. Through observing the changes in the formation, Shikaku Nara gradually figured out what kind of character Ho-Tu, as the leader of the defense formation, has. He was steady, but he wasn't flexible enough to understand the pros and cons of the situation. When he launched an attack on the node in the defense formation, in order to prevent himself from destroying the entire formation, Ho-Tu, as the leader of the formation, will naturally transfer a certain amount of power to protect this node. In order to prevent himself from using this power to attack other parts of the formation, Ho-Tu will definitely transfer a lot of power to the passage that doesn't affect other parts of the formation. According to Kuroto's observation, the closest path that doesn't affect other parts of the army is actually the one he sent at the beginning. Once he uses ninjutsu to block this path on a large scale, he will naturally be able to intercept all the forces transferred by the Emperor of Thick Earth. Ho-Tu himself has a calm temperament. When judging the actions of others, he naturally doesn't make wild guesses, but directly judges the actions of others with his own formal logic. If Ho-Tu is Shikaku Nara, after attacking the node, he will definitely look for a weaker-looking part of the formation to attack, so that he can cause the greatest effect with the least loss. Therefore, Ho-Tu also gathered a part of his power at the weakest part of the formation at this moment. As long as Shikaku Nara comes to attack this weak part, it will directly break, forming a formation that is similar to a cloth bag, encircling the attacking ninjas of the allied forces and annihilating them. But as an excellent chess player, Shikaku Nara has long been accustomed to figuring out the thoughts of the opponent and setting his own trap one step or two or even dozens of steps in advance. Although Shikaku Nara's personal strength isn't the strongest in the Woodleaf village, there are very few people who can surpass him in intelligence. What Ho-Tu can think of, Shikaku Nara can naturally think of, and what Ho-Tu can't think of, Shikaku Nara can still think of. So now, the last force left by Shikaku Nara is not to attack the so-called weak point in the formation, but to directly attack the node that he originally attacked. The art of war, the way of deception. What is false is true, what is true is false. Attack when the enemy is unprepared, catch them off guard. The combination of false and true, the combination of deception and righteousness, the combination of the two can win the battle, and win the war. Shikaku Nara looked at the changes in the battlefield, his eyes were full of wisdom. At this moment, Shikaku Nara is no longer a ninja, but a master of the art of war. Chapter 755. Nara Shikaku's method of breaking the defensive formation wasn't very subtle. It was just based on observing the changes in the formation and his understanding of Ho-Tu to a certain extent. He was able to reasonably guess the opponent's next move, and then predict the enemy's move, and even use the opponent's reaction to gain an advantage for himself. This kind of operation wasn't a shocking trick. It could only be said to pay attention to details and catch loopholes, but this kind of intelligence and military means is very rare in the ninja world. Nara Shikaku's amazing military talent and insight into weaknesses directly brought a great advantage to the ninja allied forces. A large number of ninjas rushed into the defensive formation organized by the Blood Cloak Pavilion. The node of the formation was broken in an instant, and naturally, it also directly tore a hole in the defensive formation. A large number of ninjas directly entered through such a gap. Losing the advantage of the formation, the disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion could only directly rush up and fight with the ninjas of the ninja allied forces. Without the support of the formation, in order to defend against the attack of the ninja allied forces, the disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion were not afraid of death at this moment. The number of casualties of the Blood Cloak Pavilion disciples increased greatly. This made Ho-Tu, who was in charge of the formation, feel very nervous. After all, the mistake of the formation was his own failure. Because of his mistake, the disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion suffered such heavy casualties, and it is very likely that because of his mistake in command, the treatment of the leader will be hindered. At that time, not only will he be sorry for the disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion who died in the bloody battle against the ninja allied forces, but he will also be sorry for the thousands of internal force cultivators. It is very likely that they will miss a different future. Disciples of the Thick Earth Altar. Since he made a mistake, Ho-Tu naturally won't escape. The internal strength in Obito's body was activated to the extreme, and the internal strength with some earth attribute was directly applied to Obito's body. It covered Obito's skin with a bit of turbid yellow luster, and it was full of a kind of immovable momentum. Ho-Tu's shout was naturally echoed by the Thick Earth Altar's disciples. After hearing Ho-Tu's shout, countless Thick Earth Altar's disciples also raised their heavy shields and heavy weapons high and shouted, "Let's go! Disciples of the Thick Earth Altar are here. Deep Earth Altar's disciple is here. Deep Earth Altar's disciple is here." The disciples of the Thick Earth Altar roared at the same time. One person's roar might not be that frightening, but when the roars of several hundred disciples converged together, it was like a powerful torrent filled with a powerful deterrent force. Hearing the angry roars of the Deep Earth Altar's disciples, Ho-Tu's eyes flashed with determination. He raised the heavy gauntlet in his hand and said to everyone, "I, Ho-Tu, as the commander responsible for commanding the defensive formation, let the enemy break through the formation because of my own incompetence. This is my fault. I should die now to atone for my sins, but the situation is urgent. Now the ninja allied forces are constantly attacking us. In order to protect the future of our blood cloth pavilion, I ask the disciples to fight with me against the ninja allied forces and fight for the future of our blood cloth pavilion." What was the vitality of the blood robe pavilion? For the ninjas who were not disciples of the blood cloth pavilion, it may be a bit difficult to understand, but the disciples of the blood cloth pavilion knew better than anyone what the future of the blood cloth pavilion was. The future of the blood garment pavilion depended on the blood garment pavilion's chief, Nangongzhe, who was lying in Greenwood Altar Master's arms. Ho-ho! Ho-ho! The disciples of the thick earth altar shouted without any special meaning. In the beginning, the disciples of the thick earth altar didn't shout in unison. However, as they continued to shout, their shouts gradually became uniform. At the same time, the disciples of the thick earth altar gradually formed a formation. Although this formation was not as unpredictable and magnificent as the previous formation formed by the disciples of the blood cloth pavilion, it was full of a sharp aura. At this moment, the disciples of the thick earth altar had linked their internal strength together through this formation. They were no longer scattered individuals, but had become a complete whole. Shikaku Nara could barely find the flaws in the constantly changing formation through observation and probing, and then the ninjas of the ninja allied forces would find an opportunity to directly break the formation. However, in the face of no change, and all the members who formed the formation had become a part of the formation, it was no longer unpredictable but motionless like a mountain. There were no shortcuts. The formation was like a river or a lake, it was aggressive and powerful, but its unpredictability had also become the biggest shortcoming of the formation. The changes represented the strength and weakness of the formation. When the formation was strong, there was no doubt that as long as the enemy was not stronger than the formation, then the formation would naturally have no flaws. But once the formation began to weaken, as long as the enemy could find the gaps and even lead the gaps to launch a powerful attack on the flaws, no matter how exquisite the formation was, there was a possibility that it would be broken. At this moment, the formation that all the disciples of the thick earth altar used was the opposite extreme of the formation, which was the unchanging extreme. Abandoning those changes and stabilizing everything, it was like a majestic mountain that sat firmly on the ground. The way to deal with it was very simple. He just had to use his most powerful force to dig through this mountain. There was no possibility of trickery. Looking at the formation formed by the disciples of the thick earth altar, Shikaku Nara directly jumped high and landed directly at the front of the formation. With the addition of Shikaku Nara, the formation seemed to become completely natural. Shikaku Nara was the real core of this formation. It didn't matter if there was any damage in other places, as long as Shikaku Nara was still there, the formation was still there. Shikaku Nara was the soul that all the disciples of the thick earth altar needed to use the formation at this moment. Thick earth altar, break the enemy lines. Although there were countless ninjas in front of him, and there were 6 Kage-level powerhouses among these ninjas who could launch a fatal attack at any time, Shikaku Nara didn't dare to do anything. Chapter 756. Although Ho-Tu's strength has improved over the years, he was only comparable to a Kage-level powerhouse. When his defense was pushed to the extreme, he might be able to resist the attack of 2 Kage-level powerhouses. But now Bai Shui and Akame are constantly besieging Namikaze Minato in the center of the formation. Old Man Aoki is also using his own internal strength to keep Namikaze Minato alive. There is no one who can help Old Man Aoki face the 6 Kage-level experts of the Ninja Alliance. In other words, to a certain extent, at this moment, Thick Earth was actually leading hundreds of disciples of the Thick Earth altar to try to delay the attack of the allied forces with their own lives, so as to buy enough time for the battle between Bai Shui and Namikaze Minato, and for Old Man Aoki to save Nangongja. Everyone with the Thick Earth altar directly rushed into the camp of the ninja allied forces like a sharp and heavy awl. For a while, they were in the limelight, and it was difficult for them to resist. In the center of the battlefield, although Bai Shui and Akame were attacking Watergate with many ninjas of Blood Cloak Pavilion, they also noticed what was happening outside the formation at this moment. Although it looked like Thick Earth was leading the Thick Earth altar's disciples to charge left and right in the enemy's camp, Bai Shui and Qi Yan had some understanding of this formation. Ho-Tu breaking formation was a formation that connected all the disciples of Ho-Tu altar, allowing the disciples of Ho-Tu altar to gather their internal energy and exert an extremely powerful force. But in fact, this formation was more focused on defense than offense. Now, in order to attract the attention of the ninja allied forces, Ho-Tu turned a defensive formation into an offensive formation. Hundreds of disciples of Ho-Tu altar and Ho-Tu himself directly condensed together from a thick shield into a sharp knife. A knife was a lethal weapon. If it was used well, it would naturally be invincible, but if it wasn't used well, it would also have the possibility of hurting others and oneself. Because of their own cultivation method, the disciples of Ho-Tu altar didn't have the advantage in attack. At this moment, they were constantly overdrawing their physical strength and internal energy. Even if this battle could really be stopped, the disciples of Ho-Tu altar who participated in the formation would more or less have internal injuries. It was very likely that most of them wouldn't be able to make any progress in their lives. After understanding the danger of the battlefield, Akame and Bai Shui looked at each other, and after confirming each other's thoughts, they directly took out their great sword and long whip and rushed out from the core of the formation. Seeing Akame and Bai Shui coming out, the center of the formation also began to change. The ring-shaped formation actually expanded a little. Then, a large number of disciples from the Jade Water altar and the blood-robed pavilion stepped out from the center of the formation and followed behind Jade Water and Qi Yan, forming a rhombus-shaped formation. Although it wasn't very similar to the Thick Earth formation that Thick Earth and the Thick Earth altar's disciples used outside the formation, it still connected the Qi and internal Qi of the Green Water altar and Scarlet Flame altar's disciples and their altar masters. Water and Fire Duality Battle Formation. Bai Shui and Qi Yan called out the name of the battle formation formed by the disciples of Bai Shui altar and Qi Yan altar at the same time. Water and fire were two conflicting attributes. Not only could water restrain fire, but when fire burned to a certain extent, it could also restrain water. This kind of mutual restraint naturally allowed the fusion of water and fire to display an extremely powerful might. At this moment, the water and fire duality battle formation formed by the disciples of Bishui altar and Scarlet Flame altar used the mutual restraint of water and fire to the extreme. At this moment, Bai Shui and Akame Flame were the tip of the diamond-shaped formation closest to Bo Feng Watergate. The two of them mobilized the powerful internal strength of the disciples of Bishui altar and Scarlet Flame altar behind them, constantly attacking Bo Feng Watergate. The internal strength of water and fire was transmitted into Bo Feng Watergate's body through the collision of weapons. Almost in the blink of an eye, Bo Feng Watergate's body was in a strange state of half scorching hot and half cold. The two forces of water and fire were constantly attacking Watergate's body, making Bo Feng Watergate's body the battlefield of the two forces of nature. Watergate was indeed very powerful, but in the face of such a powerful battle formation, how long could he resist? At this moment, Namikaze Minato's consciousness had already become somewhat blurry under the combined attacks of Scarlet Flame and Bai Shui. His entire person no longer had his usual refined and gentle demeanor. Instead, he was like a madman, constantly relying on his almost instinctive battle consciousness to fight against Bai Shui and Scarlet Flame. Looking at Namikaze Minato, who was covered in blood and ragged clothes, at this moment, he was in a state of madness, constantly fighting with him. He wasn't afraid of death, nor was he afraid of getting injured. Originally, He was planning to capture Namikaze Minato and use him to threaten the ninja allied forces to temporarily stop fighting and buy time for old man Aoki to wake up the head of the Nangong family. Because Bofeng Watergate could only display his value when he was alive. Once Bofeng Watergate died, it would only stimulate the fighting spirit of the ninja allied forces, making the situation of the Blood Cloth Pavilion more difficult. Originally, as the representatives of the two warring forces, Nangongja and Bofeng Watergate could be said to be the key to the victory or defeat of the ninja allied forces, but now, because of various coincidences, Bofeng Watergate and Nangongja's lives were also directly on the line. They could directly lose their lives at any time. It could be said that it was quite a bit of fate. Once Aoki could awaken Nangongja's consciousness and let Nangongja rely on Aoki's Shinchi to directly heal his injuries, there was a chance for Nangongja to directly lead the Blood Cloth Pavilion to defeat the ninja allied forces. At that time, as the victor, the Blood Cloth Pavilion could directly kill off the ninja allied forces, and make internal force cultivation the mainstream existence of this era. And once the ninja allied forces could break through the blockade of the Blood Cloth Pavilion and rescue Bofeng Watergate, they would lose the restriction on their own strength. The 6 Kage-level powerhouses could directly use their most powerful means to directly kill all the internal force cultivators in the ninja allied forces. Without such a group of powerful internal force cultivators, how could the Blood Cloth Pavilion exist in this world? Chapter 757. At this moment, both the ninja allied forces and the Blood Cloak Pavilion needed time. The Blood Cloak Pavilion needed time to wake up their leader, Nangongja, and the ninja allied forces needed time to rescue the 4th Hokage from the siege. However, as two opposing sides, they would naturally do their best to make the other side not have enough time to achieve their goals. It was precisely because of this that the battle situation, which should have been delayed, turned into an unreserved and endless decisive battle. Ninjas need a certain amount of time to perform ninjutsu. Taking advantage of this time, the disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion could fully display their superb physical abilities and directly attack the ninjas. Not only could they interrupt the ninjutsu cast by the ninjas, but they could also cause enough damage to the ninjas. On the other hand, internal force cultivators themselves are limited by their own attack range. Once the distance between them and the ninja is increased, they will fall into a passive state. It is very likely that they will be kited to death by the ninja's long-range ninjutsu. Whether it was ninjas or internal force cultivators, each had their own disadvantages and advantages. When such two powerful classes collided, it was naturally inevitable that they would directly cause serious damage to each other. The ninja allied forces and the Blood Cloak Pavilion began to suffer a large number of casualties at this moment. In a canyon near the battlefield in the Land of Lightning, two figures were confronting each other at this moment. One of them had short blonde hair, the other had medium-length black hair, one had a face full of emotions, and the other looked quite cold. The two of them looked at each other at this moment. There was no burning light in their eyes as if they were mortal enemies. Instead, there was a bit of persistence in their eyes, persistence in their ideals, persistence in their beliefs, and persistence in their ninja path. Sasuke, do you really want to stick to such a path that is almost like an evil spirit? Looking at Uchiha Sasuke with medium-length black hair standing opposite him, Uzumaki Naruto's eyes were full of complex emotions. In fact, Naruto admired Sasuke's courage to embark on such a path of turning himself into an evil spirit and then bringing change to the ninja world. However, even just thinking about such a path was enough to understand the hardships and difficulties in it. As a close friend of Uchiha Sasuke, Naruto really didn't want his friend to embark on such a path. Taking a deep look at Uzumaki Naruto, who still didn't give up persuading him, Uchiha Sasuke's heart was actually a bit emotional. After all, the reason why Naruto fought with him at this moment was not only because he disagreed with his plan, but also because he was worried about him. Such a situation made Uchiha Sasuke's heart involuntarily moved. However, Uchiha Sasuke himself was very bad at expressing his feelings. When he saw that Naruto was so concerned about him, even if Sasuke tried his best, he couldn't say any words of thanks. He could only look at Naruto with his slightly frosty face and said to Naruto, "Naruto, no matter what, this is my own choice. Since you don't agree with it for so long, don't just persuade me with your mouth. We are all warriors. Since we are warriors, we naturally have to use the warrior's way to prove that we are right. If you want me to give up my choice, use your fist to persuade me," Sasuke said. He also threw the silver broken sword in his hand directly into the ground. Chakra surged all over his body. Apparently, he had gathered all the remaining power in his body together to prepare for the final battle with Naruto. Seeing that Sasuke had started to move, Naruto naturally wouldn't be afraid of fighting. He took a step forward, and an extremely powerful momentum appeared all over his body. The two kept brewing the power in their bodies, waiting to reach the peak of each other's battle power, and then they would have a real battle. Sasuke. Naruto. Looking at the only figure standing opposite them, Naruto and Sasuke shouted each other's names loudly, and the accumulated power in their bodies burst out instantly at this moment. Naruto's body was wrapped in scarlet Bija chakra, while Sasuke's body surface was blooming with dazzling thunder. The two figures, one red and one blue, directly collided with each other. Powerful abilities attached to Naruto and Sasuke's body surface, constantly impacting each other in the battle between Naruto and Sasuke. Naruto and Sasuke had inherited the power of 6 paths of yin and yang from 6 paths and nin. At this moment, although the power of 6 paths of yin and yang left their bodies because of the seal of Otsutsuki Kagaya, the power of 6 paths of yin and yang stayed in the bodies of Naruto and Sasuke for a period of time. The physiques of the two also changed into two peculiar physiques of yin and yang. The Bija chakra emitted from Naruto's body and the Raiton chakra released from Sasuke's body had each other's physique attributes at this moment. The two energies still impacted each other, but they began to merge with each other, forming a strange balance. Although Naruto and Sasuke were constantly fighting at this moment, their consciousness slowly left their bodies at this moment and came to an inexplicable space. Naruto and Sasuke were very familiar with this space. It was the space where 6 paths and nin appeared at the beginning of the battle, but at this moment, there was no trace of 6 paths and nin in this space. The pure white space when they met 6 paths and nin turned into a chaotic space of black and white intertwined. "Aren't we fighting?" Looking at Naruto, who was standing beside him, Sasuke couldn't help but ask, "What's the matter?" However, Sasuke's question was not answered. Naruto just stared at the ground in front of him at this moment. There was even some pain in his eyes, which made Sasuke quite puzzled. Walking towards Naruto's side, Sasuke subconsciously put his hand on Naruto's shoulder. It seemed that he wanted to wake up Naruto and pull Naruto back from his inexplicable daze. But when Sasuke's hand touched Naruto's body, a strong and familiar will directly invaded Sasuke's body. This will had no malice, and naturally, it didn't cause the instinctive defense of 6 Tomo Rinnegan and directly invaded Sasuke's body. Chapter 758. This strong will didn't come from a stranger's will, but from Naruto's will, which Sasuke himself was very familiar with. Although the two chose different paths, they still have trust in each other beyond ordinary people, so Sasuke instinctively let Naruto's consciousness enter his body. When the strong will integrated into Sasuke's brain, Sasuke finally understood why Naruto passed his will into his body. What Naruto's will brought to Sasuke was nothing else but a visual sharing. Because of the visual limitation, Sasuke couldn't tell how many people were fighting in the scene he could see at the moment, but such a scale of battle had at least hundreds of people fighting each other. Blood splashed in the air, lives were taken directly, and corpses fell directly to the ground and were trampled. This was a battlefield, and this was a battlefield that Naruto and Sasuke were very familiar with. That's Yondaime Hokage? Sasuke constantly recognized the audio and video passed into his brain, and a very familiar but not so familiar figure directly entered Sasuke's cognition. The haori with flame lines was now stained with blood and became ragged because of the fierce battle, revealing the green ninja vest inside. Although he lost one of his arms, Watergate was still tightly holding a flying thunder god in one hand and attacking around him, responding to the opponent's attacks with almost instinctive frenzied attacks. No wonder Naruto's expression became like that. It turned out that Yondaime Hokage was in such a dangerous situation. Although the image transmitted to him wasn't from God's perspective, but from the crowd, Sasuke could see that everything in his line of sight at this moment was happening on the battlefield a little far away from himself and Naruto. The loss of life and the flow of blood are inevitable for a qualified ninja to face. Although Naruto, as the child of Hokage, was protected in various aspects, but there were definitely hundreds of people who died in the hands of Naruto, not to mention Sasuke. When he was under Orochimaru, he had been trained by Orochimaru in an almost harsh way. At that time, the number of people's lives on Sasuke's hands had exceeded 500. After that, he left Orochimaru's hands in Akatsuki and Nangongja's hands. Now, the number of people's lives in Sasuke's hands is definitely not less than 1,000. But no matter how many people's lives are in their hands, as human beings with their own independent souls and not tools, Naruto and Sasuke still have people in their hearts who can't be hurt no matter what. For Naruto, Namake's Watergate was naturally such a person. Originally, in the battle with Otsutsuki Kagaya, Watergate lost his own arm because of Kill Ash, and now he was directly forced into such a dangerous situation. Even if Naruto was deeply righteous and optimistic, he couldn't suppress his inner emotions in the face of all this. After seeing Namake's Watergate situation, Sasuke didn't pay much attention. After all, although Namake's Watergate was under the siege of two 5 Elements Altar Lords, he could still barely hold on for a while. At this moment, there was no danger to his life. On the contrary, after seeing Watergate's situation, Sasuke was quite anxious to find the figure of his teacher, Bloodcloak Pavilion's head Nangongja, in the crowd. For Naruto, his father was one of the people who couldn't be hurt, and for Sasuke, Nangongja, who was his teacher and father, was naturally such an existence. After constant searching, Sasuke finally found the figure of his teacher, Nangongja, but at this moment, Nangongja no longer had the steady and unpredictable spirit that he usually had in front of him. Instead, he fell into the arms of Aogi Altar Lord, Old Man Aoki. Old Man Aoki's state was also very weak at the moment. If Sasuke's guess was right, then his teacher, Bloodcloak Pavilion's head, Nangongja, should have suffered extremely serious injuries. Old Man Aoki used his own vigorous internal strength to continuously transmit it into Nangongja's body, barely maintaining Nangongja's vitality. How is this possible? Just like how Naruto fell into great grief when he saw his father being besieged by the crowd, Uchiha Sasuke also found it very difficult to accept when he saw his powerful teacher become like this at the moment. Seeing such a scene, Sasuke no longer had the thought of competing with Naruto to see whose idea was more correct. Because people who couldn't even protect the things they wanted to protect, how could they be qualified to talk about their ideals? I must go to the battlefield and wake up Nangong-sensei. After seeing Nangongja's situation, Uchiha Sasuke immediately decided to end the current battle and go back to rescue his teacher. After seeing his father in such a dangerous situation, Naruto naturally no longer insisted on competing with Sasuke, but wanted to immediately go back to the battlefield to rescue his father. At the same time, the two people's hearts sprouted the thought of retreating at the same time. In this turbid space where black and white blended, there was also an irresistible repulsive force that directly forced Naruto and Sasuke's consciousness out of such a space, allowing them to return to their bodies. In the turbid space, Naruto and Sasuke had already retreated when they saw the situation on the battlefield. Now that they had regained control of their bodies, they naturally dissipated the various attack methods they used, preparing to save the strength in their bodies to go back to protect their father and sensei, who were very important to them. And just after the two of them withdrew their attacks, they were surprised to find that the chakra in their body that had been exhausted before had unexpectedly directly returned to their peak state at this moment. Chapter 759. Although Naruto and Sasuke didn't know why their bodies suddenly recovered completely, it must have something to do with entering the black and white chaotic space. It was too late to care about these things. After all, recovering their strength wasn't a bad thing for Naruto and Sasuke. Sasuke and Naruto didn't hesitate. The moment they got control of their bodies, they rushed towards the battlefield. Both of them chose to strengthen their speed in various ways. Eternal Manjikyu Sharingan and 6 Tomo Rinnegan in Sasuke's eyes rotated wildly. A large amount of eye power wrapped in chakra directly covered Uchiha Sasuke's body. The purple energy formed a huge rib on Sasuke's body, and behind the rib, a pair of huge wings condensed by chakra also quickly formed. Because of the upgrade of his eyes, Sasuke's control of his power became more and more precise. Just like now, when he used Susanoo, he only summoned 2 parts, the rib and the wings. The rib and himself were connected as a channel to transmit his will and energy, and the wings appeared behind him as a tool for flight. Although the combination of rib and wings didn't look so beautiful, Sasuke himself was a practical person. Just summoning the rib and wings was actually a way to greatly reduce his own consumption. Sasuke was very clear that as long as he arrived at the battlefield, he would face countless enemies. At this time, he had to ensure that he had enough fighting power, and he also had to do his best to rush to his teacher Nangong's side to help him. It was precisely because of this need that Sasuke used Susanoo like this. Watching Sasuke spread his huge wings behind him and soar in the sky, Naruto's heart inevitably became a little anxious. After all, Sasuke belonged to the Blood Cloak Pavilion camp. Once Sasuke returned to the battlefield, he would naturally do his best to help the Blood Cloak Pavilion. If Sasuke came to the battlefield earlier than him, he would definitely cause great danger to his father. Naruto's relationship with Sasuke was indeed very good, but his father and Sasuke didn't have much interaction. Although he didn't know the truth about the Uchiha clan's destruction, he already knew that it was done by the people of Woodleaf Village. Sasuke didn't have a good impression of Woodleaf Village. Now his father's life was also on the line waiting for rescue. Once Sasuke came to the battlefield earlier, he might harvest his father's life with his current relatively complete strength. It was about his biological father who was related to him by blood. Naturally, it was impossible for Naruto to pin everything on the illusory possibility, so he must do his best to reach the battlefield with Sasuke, or even earlier than Sasuke. Sasuke needed to conserve chakra, but Naruto didn't need it. When he and Sasuke joined forces to absorb all the energy in Otsutsuki Kagaya's body, although it seemed that the power of Bijou had returned to the world or was directly consumed as the energy to supply Rikudo Chibaku Tensei. But in fact, the 9 Bijou Zone will entered Naruto's body at the same time as Otsutsuki Kagaya was sealed. Although there was no way to support Naruto to enter Rikudo mode because of the massive consumption of Bijou's power, Bijou chakra with the 9 Bijou's will was also constantly getting stronger at this moment, enough to support Naruto to enter Kurama mode. Naruto mobilized a large number of Bijou chakra. In the process of running quickly, he also closed his eyes and drew the natural energy around him into his body. That's right, the natural energy that should only be absorbed in a state of absolute stillness can now be absorbed while moving because of the evolution of Naruto's physique. In other words, the current Naruto can completely rely on his physique advantage to stay in Sage mode for a long time. Kurama mode and Sage mode were displayed at the same time. At this moment, Naruto's body was also covered by the golden chakra flame. The golden chakra flame turned into a silk thread and directly weaved a set of gorgeous clothes on Naruto's body. Naruto opened his eyes at this moment. His pupils had turned orange with a slight golden luster, and the center became a very strange cross-shaped eye shape. Sengoku mode. A large number of Sengoku chakra mixed with Bijou chakra constantly condensed in Naruto's body. Naruto directly used this energy to form 4 huge feet behind him. Although the 4 feet were condensed behind Naruto's back, they directly extended to the ground, running directly on the ground like animals. However, Compared to Sasuke's almost delicate control of chakra, Naruto's own control ability was relatively weaker. Some chakra still escaped and formed a huge fox phantom. Huge ribs and wings soared in the sky, and a huge demon fox with solid limbs but an unusually illusory body ran on the ground. Susanu's huge wings with boundless sharpness directly broke through the air that was hindering its flying speed. The demon fox incarnation directly relied on its 4 limbs to constantly run on the ground, and everything that was hindering its advance was directly smashed into pieces by the huge power of the demon fox incarnation. Although Naruto and Sasuke deliberately avoided the place where the two armies fought in the previous battle, after all, the battle had not been going on for a long time. Naruto and Sasuke were actually not far from the battlefield. With Naruto and Sasuke running with all their strength, the disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion and the ninja allied forces on the battlefield naturally saw the figures of Naruto and Sasuke. Although these two people were not very old, and were even very young compared to most people on the battlefield, but as the leader of the Blood Cloak Pavilion, the disciple of Shinobi World's Yama, and the child of Yondaime Hokage and Golden Flash, their identity, background, and personal strength were still recognized by everyone. After seeing the two people quickly approaching the battlefield, the ninja allied forces and the Blood Cloak Pavilion were also looking forward to their own geniuses to replace their fathers and continue to create a new future, so that their forces can gain an advantage in the battle. Chapter 760. Father. Sensei. When Naruto and Sasuke's eyes could see the battlefield, they began to look for the people who were very important to them. With their amazing eyesight, they quickly found Nangongjia, who was lying on the ground in the arms of Old Man Aoki, and Namake's Minato, who was in danger under the siege of the Blood Robe Pavilion and could die at any time. Seeing the people who were very important to them become like this at this moment, whether it was Naruto or Sasuke, their hearts were filled with endless anger at this moment, and the most obvious manifestation was their loud roar and sudden acceleration. The eternal Manjikyu Sharingan and 6-Tomo Rinnegan in Sasuke's eyes rotated at high speed, and a large amount of eye power and chakra directly emerged from Sasuke's body, directly mending the ribs and wings of Susanoo. The heavy Crow Tengu armor and 2 chakra condensed chakra directly appeared on Susanoo's body and hands. Sasuke-sama. Chief Nangong still has a glimmer of life at this moment. Old Man Aoki is trying his best to awaken Nangong's consciousness. As long as Chief Nangong's consciousness awakens from the chaos, he can quickly recover with his own strength and Old Man Aoki's assistance. After seeing Sasuke directly joining the battle, and sensing an extremely powerful aura from Sasuke's body, Bishui, who was the closest to Nangongjia among the 5 elements altar lords, directly used her internal strength to tell Sasuke about the situation at the moment. Although Sasuke didn't have any sense of belonging to Blood Cloth Pavilion, Sasuke still had some understanding of Bishui, the altar lord of Blood Cloth Pavilion who was very loyal to his sensei. After hearing that his sensei needed time, he immediately made a plan in his heart. The huge complete body Susanoo directly rushed towards the location of the allied ninja forces, who were engaged in a battle with the outer defense formation of Blood Cloth Pavilion. With his ability to fly, Uchiha Sasuke directly controlled the complete body Susanoo to float in the sky to ensure that ordinary ninjutsu couldn't attack him. Then the chakra in his body stirred up a lot, and he and Susanoo formed different hand signs to prepare for the attack. Sasuke's timing was very good. The 6 Kage-level powerhouses in the allied ninja forces, including Jiraiya, Orochimaru, Tsunade, Gaara, Terumi Mei, and A, were fighting against the Thick Earth Altar's Thick Earth Breaking formation at this moment because of the fearless attack of the Thick Earth Altar's disciples and Thick Earth himself. When he saw Uchiha Sasuke floating above the allied ninja forces and constantly gathering power, Thick Earth, as the commander of the formation, immediately began to direct the Thick Earth Altar's ninja to directly entangle the 6 Kage-level powerhouses at all costs. Although the average ninja in the allied ninja forces also has good strength, there is still a huge gap between them and Uchiha Sasuke, whose body has evolved into six-path-yin body and cast the complete version of Susanoo. Sometimes the gap in strength can't be made up by quantity. The chakra in Sasuke's body continued to flow into Susanoo's body, and a part of chakra was left in his body by Sasuke to cooperate with Susanoo to cast ninjutsu. Katand Super Dragon Fire Jutsu. The original Dragon Fire Jutsu was only a huge flame dragon head when it was cast, but at this moment, because Sasuke poured a huge amount of chakra into it, the original huge dragon head also became extended and directly turned into a whole flame dragon rushing directly into the sky. The huge flame dragon rushed directly out of Susanoo's body and rushed into the sky, forming a magnificent scene, making the battle in the entire battlefield seem to have a trace of stagnation. As Uchiha Sasuke's best friend, others don't know what ninjutsu Sasuke is using, but Naruto is very clear about it and knows how powerful this ninjutsu is. At this moment, Sasuke is directly using Susanoo's huge body and the powerful blessing ability of ninjutsu to cast such a large-scale attack ninjutsu that is enough to rank in the top few among the ninjutsu that Sasuke can master. Naruto can't imagine what kind of casualties such a ninjutsu will cause if it falls into the many ninjas of the allied ninja forces. Glancing at his father, who was still besieged by many disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion, Naruto's eyes showed a tangled look. After all, he is the only one who can fight against Sasuke at this moment. If he wants to save the many ninjas of the allied ninja forces, he naturally needs his own ability. In the same way, his father is constantly attacked by countless strong ninjas at this moment. At this moment, it seems that he has been relying on his own will and instinct to persist. No one knows how long this situation will last. Once he wastes a lot of time and consumes a lot of power to save the many ninjas of the allied ninja forces, can he still save his father with a little effort like now? At this moment, Naruto is caught in a competition between public and private interests. Should he give up a small number of people for the sake of the majority, or follow his own inner desire to do what he wants to do? Such a question, even the wisest man in the world may not be able to give an answer, let alone a young child like Uzumaki Naruto. However, Naruto's heart can be tangled, but the speed of Sasuke's attack will not decrease in the slightest. Susanoo's constantly forming hand seals finally stopped at this moment, and a large number of chakra was directly extracted from Uchiha Sasuke's body, and a purple thunder condensed directly in Susanoo's hand. Although it was different from Nangong's black thunder, the same powerful destructive aura still came out from it. Uchiha Sasuke's face became a little pale at this moment because of the large number of chakra output, but Sasuke's eyes were particularly determined, and he didn't have any change in expression because he was about to kill hundreds of powerful ninjas. Uchiha Sasuke pursues the path of evil spirits in this world, and killing Uchiha Sasuke is no pressure at all. Divine Beast Patrol, Kirin descends. Susanoo Raitun Kirin. Chapter 761. Dark clouds shrouded the sky. From time to time, rumbling sounds of thunder could be heard from within the dark clouds. Occasionally, a few rays of light would flicker within the dark clouds and emit a terrifying aura. This caused everyone to feel fear and reverence, as if the heavens were enraged. Sasuke's eyes were full of frost, it seems that even his soul and his will have been completely frozen. As long as he can achieve his goal, Sasuke can completely seal all his emotions and not let them affect him. Sasuke's own plan is to break the original order of ninja world and establish an ideal world where everyone can restrain their evil thoughts. The establishment of such a world inevitably requires conflict with the maintainers of the old order, ninja. Therefore, the elimination of a large number of ninjas is an unavoidable process for Sasuke to achieve his plan. As long as Sasuke still insists on his beliefs, then whether it is in the future or now, he must harden his heart, otherwise, it will be a stain on his will. Go, through the connection between the purple thunder in Susanoo's hand and the dark clouds in the sky, Sasuke also constantly felt the huge power brewing in the dark clouds. After feeling that such power has reached the extreme at this moment, Sasuke also directly controlled Susanoo to wave the hand wrapped in purple thunder, and directed the huge power directly to the ninja coalition army on the ground. The purple thunder was like a chain, directly dragging a large group of thunder and lightning out of the dark clouds. Unlike the ordinary version of Raitun, Kirin, that Sasuke had originally used, this group of thunder and lightning at this moment was much larger, and there was a lot of thunder and lightning that had been assimilated into purple thunder and lightning wandering around in it, adding a bit of majesty and dignity to the blue-white thunder and lightning Kirin behemoth. Roar! Obviously, it was just a product of thunder and lightning, but the blue-purple thunder and lightning entangled Kirin directly roared at the sky. The roar was like a golden spear and a yellow bell, and for a while, it directly resounded through the sky and drilled into everyone's ears. When people with slightly lower strength heard Kirin's roar, they directly fell into a sluggish state and couldn't move. It seemed that this roar was venting all the anger and injustice caused by all the filth of time, and then directly swept over the living beings under him with ruthless eyes, and then directly rushed down the purple lightning chain in the hand of Susanoo that was connected to him. Many ninjas of the ninja allied forces looked at the blue and purple Qilin, and most of their legs began to tremble at this moment. After all, when they fought with Uchiha Obito, Uchiha Madara, and Kagaya Otsutsuki before, such a high-level battle is not something that ordinary ninjas can participate in. Although they have seen the huge power erupting when the super-strong fight from a distance, after all, it didn't happen to them. Most of the ninjas of the ninja allied forces were not mentally prepared for such a battle. The blue-purple Qilin was getting closer and closer to many ninjas of the ninja allied forces, and the majestic face of Kirin was constantly magnified in the eyes of many ninjas of the ninja allied forces. Many ninjas of the ninja allied forces have closed their eyes and quietly waited for such a thing that they have no way to resist. This is not fear, but pure powerlessness. Just when everyone was waiting for their bodies to be ravaged by lightning, then lose consciousness and then lose their lives, after a violent tremor on the ground, nothing seemed to happen. The ninjas of the ninja allied forces opened their originally closed eyes and saw a huge golden fox in front of them. Black lines were drawn on the fox's body, and a shield condensed by a large number of chakra directly isolated the countless lightning bolts. Although the shield seemed to be a bit shaky under the impact of the lightning, the demon fox incarnation was still constantly transmitting a large number of chakra to the shield to maintain the shield from being broken. When he saw the demon fox incarnation directly appear in the ninja allied forces, Sasuke immediately looked at the place where Yondaime Hokage, Naruto's father, Namake's Watergate, was surrounded by many ninjas of the Blood Cloak Pavilion. Because no matter what, Sasuke couldn't believe that Naruto could really give up his father so decisively. Beside Namake's Watergate, a figure with a golden chakra coat also appeared at this moment. This person was none other than Namake's Watergate's child, Uzumaki Naruto. Did he use Shadow Clone Jutsu? Seeing two figures of Naruto suddenly appear on the battlefield, Sasuke's heart also slightly understood what kind of situation it was. Naruto was still the Naruto he knew in the beginning. When faced with a dilemma and people had to make a choice, Naruto would often give an answer that no one expected. Although the power gathered together can exert the greatest effect, Naruto's current goal is not to defeat or destroy anything, but just to protect the things he wants to protect. Compared to attack, as long as the right method is found for defense, then it can naturally achieve its goal with less consumption. Therefore, Naruto directly used Shadow Clone Jutsu to let his clone carry a large number of Bijuu chakra and condense the Demon Fox incarnation to protect the ninja allied forces from Sasuke's powerful attack. His own body directly relied on his own huge chakra and the unpredictable power of Senjutsu chakra to rush into the enemy's formation to rescue his father who was besieged. Hey! Naruto boy, hurry up and save your father. Although I can barely hold on here, we must not consume too much energy. From the mouth of the Demon Fox incarnation above the ninja allied forces, Naruto's arrogant and low voice came out directly. At this moment, the Demon Fox incarnation was actually controlled by Kyuubi's consciousness. As the strongest existence among the nine-tailed beasts, Kurama's time in Kyuubi's body was relatively short, and his strength was the fastest to recover. At this moment, Kurama was able to use his ability to help Naruto fight. Chapter 762. Hearing Kurama's shout, Uzumaki Naruto, who was in the middle of the Blood Cloak Pavilion's attack, also felt the pressure. He didn't enter such an attack, he couldn't understand how terrible it was just by looking at it with his eyes. However, when Naruto directly entered the water-fire duality battle formation, formed by the Azure Altar and the Scarlet Flame Altar of the Blood Cloth Pavilion, he felt the two forces of water and fire raging in his body. Even Naruto's body, which had been transformed by the power of 6 paths of Yang, felt great discomfort. Naruto looked back at his father, who was standing behind him and seemed to have fallen into a state of madness. He was constantly fighting against the 2 altar lords of the Blood Cloak Pavilion, Bisui and Akaji. The 2 forces of water and fire invaded his body again and again, but he still kept attacking. Naruto's eyes flashed with a trace of admiration. Although Naruto had powerful strength, his father was still far superior to him in terms of temperament and will. It seemed that he had to be ruthless. Now Naruto was very clear that once a large amount of water and fire energy accumulated in his body would involuntarily be entangled by the water-fire duality battle formation formed by the Azure Altar and the Scarlet Flame Altar. There was no chance for him to escape. Therefore, he must immediately use thunderous means to break the water-fire duality battle formation before he was completely trapped in it. Only in this way could he have a chance to take his father away safely. Although Naruto did not have much tailed beast chakra in his body at the moment, the amount of chakra in his body was extremely large. A large number of chakra gathered in his palm under the control of Naruto. His body tensed up. It was obvious that he was going to rely on his physical strength to fight the Azure Altar and the Scarlet Flame Altar of the Blood Cloth Pavilion directly. Immortal Art, Frog Gauntlet. Although Frog Gauntlet was only a sea-level ninjutsu, its power and range of application far exceeded the limit of ordinary sea-level ninjutsu. When Naruto instilled a large amount of chakra in his palm, the power of Frog Gauntlet skyrocketed. Naruto's Sage Mode and Bijou Mode superimposed together to form a X-shaped eye. Although it's not as good as the Byakugan and Sharingan, which are Kekkei Genkai from the bloodline, its ability to capture the dynamic world and its perception is far beyond ordinary eyes. Soon, with the help of his dynamic vision, Naruto had basically figured out the operation mode of the water-fire duality battle formation. As a battle formation, the water-fire duality battle formation itself was not that complicated. After all, the power of hundreds of internal force practitioners was gathered in one body. Such an existence did not need to use so many methods to confuse the opponent. This kind of battle formation was also a battle formation that exerted the offensive power of water and fire to the extreme. It could be regarded as a disguised form of attack instead of defense. It did not have much defensive ability. Naruto clenched his right fist and placed it on his waist. Although there was no obvious movement of accumulating power, he concentrated his power into his fist at his waist at the moment, ready to strike at any time. Hit! Seeing the operation of the battle formation, Naruto immediately punched out with his fist that had been accumulating power for a long time. At this moment, because of the operation of the battle formation, Akame Yen, who had the most outstanding offensive ability in the battle formation, appeared right in front of Naruto. As a person who had been immersed in battle for many years, Akame Yen had already seen through Naruto's fist technique when he was accumulating power. Therefore, when Naruto punched him, Akame Yen did not panic at all. Instead, he directly jumped up and distanced himself from Naruto. Just when Akame Yen thought that he had dodged Naruto's attack and was about to attack Naruto, who had not yet recovered from the attack, a fist mark suddenly appeared on Akame Yen's abdomen. For some reason, Akame Yen, who was hit by the huge fist force, took a few steps back. Not only did Akame Yen suffer a certain injury, but more importantly, because of Akame Yen's sudden retreat, there were some flaws in the water-fire yin-yang battle formation. Seeing the flaws in the battle formation, Naruto directly came to his father's side and released his aura so that Windstorm Watergate, who was in an instinctive state, would not react to his approach. Then he directly took his father's hand and led him towards the flaws in the water-fire yin-yang battle formation. Those who stop me will die. Looking at the disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion in front of him, Naruto showed the huge power contained in his body, trying to deter the disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion in this way and reduce his consumption as much as possible. After seeing the huge aura erupting from Naruto's body, many of the disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion instinctively took a few steps back. However, after retreating, the disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion directly rushed towards Naruto's position again without fear of death. Now that the internal force cultivators and ninjas had fallen out, once they lost this battle and failed to save Nangongja's life, the Blood Cloak Pavilion would be like a fish on the chopping board, waiting to be slaughtered. Dying early or dying late would be a dead end. In this case, it was better to fight desperately now, and maybe there would be more changes. Seeing the disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion rushing towards him again after being deterred by his aura, Naruto did not hesitate at all. Although he only used one hand, he gave full play to his immortal method, Frog Hand. Under Naruto's control, the natural energy condensed into invisible fists and palms, attacking the disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion. However, Naruto obviously did not kill them. After the fists and palms came into contact with the disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion, they immediately invaded the disciples' bodies and sealed their meridians, making it impossible for them to exert their strength. They could only fall to the ground powerlessly. Then, they tried to break through the attack formation inside the Blood Cloak Pavilion with their father. Under Naruto's constant attacks, the formation became shaky, and the disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion had to divert their attention to protect Nangongja, who was also in a coma inside the formation. This undoubtedly limited the strength of the disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion. First, there was the threat of Naruto breaking through the formation, and now there was the need to protect Nangongja. The disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion were quite stretched for a while. Chapter 763. In the end, even though the disciples of the Blood Cloth Pavilion fought with all their might, they still had to defend against Naruto's attack and ensure the safety of Nangongja at the same time. They couldn't continue to control Bofeng and Watergate in the formation. Naruto's Odama Rasengan directly bombarded a disciple of the Blood Cloth Pavilion. Several disciples of the Blood Cloth Pavilion were also sent flying by the Odama Rasengan. Naruto's huge power directly blasted a big hole in the formation set up by the Blood Cloth Pavilion. Naruto took Bofeng and Watergate and used Body Flicker to escape from the hole in the formation. Damn it! Chase after them. We can't let them escape. Otherwise, all the sacrifices we made will be for naught. Seeing Naruto and Watergate rush out of the formation, Chi Yen, who was one of the masters of the defensive formation and had his meridians sealed by Naruto's attack, immediately issued an order to the disciples of the Scarlet Flame Altar under his command. After seeing Chi Yan's angry order to the disciples of the Scarlet Flame Altar, Bisui immediately came to Chi Yan's side and said to the Scarlet Flame Altar's messenger, "Alright, your altar master is currently in a rage and can't make a rational decision. Don't be in such a hurry to carry out the order. Wait for me to have a good discussion with your altar master before taking action. Understand?" As the altar master of the Clearwater Altar, Bisui couldn't directly give orders to the disciples of the Scarlet Flame Altar. However, as a disciple of the Scarlet Flame Altar, the messenger naturally understood his altar master's character very well. Scarlet Flame had done a lot of impulsive things due to his anger. Although Scarlet Flame had become a little better under Nangongja's guidance, a leopard couldn't change its spots. Scarlet Flame's nature couldn't be changed. Now that the altar master of the Jade Water Altar was standing in front of Scarlet Flame didn't need to pass on the order given by the angry Scarlet Flame. As the messenger disciple, Scarlet Flame was relieved. However, this messenger disciple was still a disciple of the Scarlet Flame Altar. Although he didn't think that his altar lord's orders were worth carrying out, he still had to wait for his altar lord's orders. Therefore, this messenger disciple stood beside Scarlet Flame and Bai Shui and didn't dare to move. Seeing that his disciple didn't carry out his order at this moment, Qi Yan's anger became even more violent. His internal strength was agitated due to the fluctuation of his emotions. His red hair swayed like flames due to the agitation of his internal strength. It constantly showed that Qi Yan's emotions were unstable. Bishui, what do you mean by this? Although you and I are both 5 elements altar masters and have the same rank, you don't have the right to command my disciples. Hearing Qi Yan's merciless reprimand, Bishui didn't get angry like Qi Yan. Instead, she looked at Qi Yan calmly like a clear spring. After enduring Bishui's gaze for a while, Qi Yan couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. The Bishui altar was in charge of assassination and intelligence work in the Blood Cloth Pavilion. As the altar master of the Bishui altar, Bishui could be said to be the person who knew the most secrets in the Blood Cloth Pavilion. Although Bai Shui looked like a gentle woman on the outside, as one of the 5 elemental altar lords, Scarlet Flame knew how hard Bai Shui's heart was. Now that Bai Shui was looking at him with a calm gaze, it was as if she was looking at a toy, cold and emotionless. Scarlet Flame immediately understood that he had angered Bai Shui. However, as the altar master of the Scarlet Flame altar, Qi Yan couldn't lose face in front of his disciple. Therefore, he could only endure the chill in his heart and continue to stare at Bishui. Seeing Qi Yan trying to show off in front of her, Bishui's originally angry mood slowly calmed down. After all, they had worked together for many years. Bai Shui was also very clear about Scarlet Flame's bad temper. Bickering with such a boorish man over such trivial matters would make her seem a little too petty, right? Now, what we should be worried about is whether or not we have directly left the life of the 4th fire shadow, Bo Feng, Watergate here. I think you should be very clear about what we should be worried about, Qi Yan. After saying that, Bishui glanced in the direction of Nangongzhe. Bai Shui's glance also caused Scarlet Flame's stubborn personality to turn around. Scarlet Flame was originally a reckless man, and he didn't have much scheming in his heart. When Nangongzhe, an outsider, first came to the Blood Cloth Pavilion to take over the position of head, Qi Yan was also used as a tool by Rui Jin. However, when Nangongzhe used his own strength to save the Blood Cloth Pavilion from danger, Qi Yan also directly gave his loyalty to Nangongzhe. Now that Nangongzhe was in danger, although Qi Yan was very angry, he was still one of the 5 elements altar masters of the Blood Cloth Pavilion. Qi Yan had to be responsible for his identity. Therefore, after Qi Yan understood Bishui's meaning, the anger in his heart was forcibly suppressed by Qi Yan. The internal strength in his body no longer surged, and Qi Yan's red hair also returned to normal. Seeing that his altar master had regained his composure, the Scarlet Flame altar's disciple, who was the messenger disciple, also breathed a sigh of relief. After all, he had disobeyed his altar master to a certain extent. If his altar master didn't calm down because of Bishui's words, he would be doomed. Pass down my order. After glancing at the Scarlet Flame altar's messenger disciple who was stopped by Bishui, Qi Yan dispelled all the anger in his heart and calmly said to him, all Scarlet Flame altar's disciples will now join the outer defensive formation and help the Deep Earth altar master resist the enemy's attack. Then, divide a group of people to protect the head as he enters the center of the formation. They have the right to protect our head. Also, pass down the order to all disciples that our head is not dead. Although he has some injuries, he is already under the control of the Greenwood altar master. As long as the head wakes up, he will be able to recover immediately. Let all Blood Cloth Pavilion's disciples know that we, who are usually protected by the head, will use our own blood to repay the head for protecting and helping the Blood Cloth Pavilion. Chapter 764. Suddenly, Akame Yan's order about Nangongzhe's situation wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. Otherwise, as the altar lord of Aquamarine Altar would have killed this disciple on the spot to prevent the news from spreading. The reason why several altar lords wanted to keep the news that Nangongzhi still had a chance to survive was for two reasons. First, they couldn't let the ninja allied forces know that Nangongzhi could still be saved. Otherwise, the ninja allied forces would launch an all-out attack on the Bloodrobe Pavilion and kill Nangongzhi completely. The second reason was that they hoped to use the fact that Nangongzhi couldn't be saved to arouse the anger in the hearts of the Bloodrobe Pavilion disciples, forming a desperate army to fight against the ninja allied forces and gain an advantage. But now, because the battle formation was broken, the pressure exerted on the Bloodrobe Pavilion disciples was even greater. Originally, they still had some effect, but now, they might be defeated directly. Therefore, as the Five Elements Altar Lord whose authority in the Bloodcloth Pavilion is second only to Nangongzhi, Akame directly used his own identity and the name of the 4 Five Elements Altar Lords to directly tell all the disciples of the Bloodcloth Pavilion that Nangongzhi still has a chance to live. He hopes that this way, he can reignite the fighting spirit of many disciples of the Bloodcloth Pavilion so that they can work harder to fight against the ninjas of the ninja allied forces. One of the important reasons why Aquamarine didn't stop Akame Yen from issuing the order was that at this moment, the huge protective shield supported by the demon fox incarnation inside the ninja allied forces had been directly broken by the powerful power of the Susanoo controlled by Sasuke. In the face of a large-scale attack, once there is a loophole in the defense, then the so-called defense is nothing more than a castle in the air. It is meaningless at all. A large amount of lightning directly invaded the protected ninja allied forces through the loophole, and some of the lightning penetrated the defensive shield and directly invaded the body of the demon fox incarnation along the defensive shield. Although Kurama himself is an existence composed of pure fire attribute energy, the prejudice and anger accumulated in his heart towards all living beings has reached the extreme after being in the ninja world for so many years. The so-called appearance is born from the heart, and his own existence will also change due to changes in his mentality. Therefore, the prejudice and malice in Kurama's body also affected the attributes of Nine Tails at this moment. The pure fire attribute was also mixed with a bit of evil. The lightning itself has an extremely strong restraining effect on evil. The purple lightning directly mixed with Kirin and invaded Kurama's body. It also constantly attacked Kurama's body, making him unable to concentrate his will to control the defensive shield, and then more lightning invaded the inside of the shield and Kirin's body, Kurama's body's body, forming a vicious cycle. At this moment, the ninjas of the ninja allied forces inside the defensive shield were actually suffering heavy casualties. Except for the 6 Kage-tier ninjas who could barely protect themselves from such an attack, most of the ninjas were more or less injured. Some of the ninjas were directly turned into charcoal under the attack of the lightning. The ninjas of the ninja allied forces suffered a large number of casualties, and their combat power was extremely reduced. They were even slightly weaker than the Bloodcloth Pavilion, so why didn't the Bloodcloth Pavilion take advantage of such an opportunity to directly boost the morale of the entire Bloodcloth Pavilion, let the ninja allied forces suffer greater losses, and buy more time for Nangongzhi to recover? Soon, Akame's order was directly passed to the ears of every Bloodcloth Pavilion disciple through the disciples at all levels. When every Bloodcloth Pavilion disciple heard that their leader Nangongzhi was still alive, their hearts were full of excitement. After all, Nangongzhi had repeatedly used his actions to tell the disciples of the Bloodcloth Pavilion that he was the one who could truly lead the Bloodcloth Pavilion to the peak. When the disciples of the Bloodcloth Pavilion knew that their leader, who was like a guiding light, still had a glimmer of hope, it was tantamount to floating in a torrent. Suddenly, a life-saving straw appeared in front of them, and all they could do was to hold this big straw tightly and tell themselves that this straw could definitely save their lives. For the leader. For the Bloodcloth Pavilion. For the future of internal strength cultivators. As the most bold and unrestrained person among the 5 Elements Altar Masters, and the one who was best at stirring up the atmosphere, at this moment, Akame directly held his great blade to a relatively high place, and used his internal strength to support his throat, so that he could make a louder voice, and shouted these 3 sentences to everyone in the blood-cloth pavilion. Then, he immediately took the lead and directly jumped into the battle. Fight! 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 Every blood-cloth pavilion disciple began to silently roar in their hearts, because there was only one thing they could do at this moment: fight. They had to fight desperately, throw all their uneasiness to the back of their minds, and fight with all their might for the future they had hoped for. If they lost their arms, they would use their teeth to bite; if they lost their legs, they would use their bodies to move forward; if they lost their heads, they would leave their fighting spirit here for everyone to see. The brave, the chi. Where the chi was, so was the strength. Where the heart was, so was the chi. Therefore, Guwen was brave and encouraged by the heart. Now, the disciples of the Blood Garment Pavilion were all holding their breaths in their hearts. This breath was like a ball of fire that was contained in the hearts of every Bloodcloak Pavilion disciple, constantly urging every Bloodcloak Pavilion disciple to unleash their full power. Ignite the fire in my heart, burn my enemy. At this moment, the Blood-Cloth Pavilion disciples gathered together again, and directly surrounded Nangongzhe, who was almost like a spiritual sustenance, in the center of the battle formation. Although the 3 5 elements altar masters, Bai Shui, Akame, and Ho Tu, were more or less injured at this moment, they still tried their best to command the Blood-Cloth Pavilion disciples present to fight against the Ninja Coalition army, and to buy time for Nangongzhe to wake up. Even if every minute and every second was fought for through the blood of their own people, no one had the slightest fear in their hearts. Living was not only about maintaining the vitality of one's body, but more people chose to live through death. Chapter 765. The battle between the ninja allied forces and the Bloodcloak Pavilion had entered a white-hot stage at this moment. Because Naruto and Sasuke, the 2 super powerhouses who had fully recovered their strength, directly joined the battlefield, bringing many new changes to the battlefield. The most obvious change was that the ninja allied forces and the Bloodcloak Pavilion had some problems on both sides. Because of Naruto's rescue, Namake's Watergate, who was controlled by the Bloodcloak Pavilion, was also brought back to the ninja allied forces camp. The ninja allied forces themselves had suffered great casualties because of Uchiha and Sasuke's powerful attack, and their combat power was greatly reduced. However, under the joint attack of the Scarlet Flame Altar and Aquamarine Altar of the Bloodcloak Pavilion, the 4th Hokage, Namake's Watergate himself, after being brought to a relatively safe place by Naruto, immediately couldn't tighten his nerves and directly fainted. After all, Namake's Watergate's identity was different from the average ninja. To a certain extent, he represented the existence of the wood leaf. As one of the wood leaf ninjas, Tsunade, who was the most skilled healer in the ninja allied forces and was also one of the Sannin, had to leave the battle circle and come to Namake's Watergate's side to help him stabilize the situation. Nangongzhe and Namake's Watergate, the 2 people who were the representatives of the Bloodcloak Pavilion and the ninja allied forces to attack each other at the beginning, now both of them fell into a coma. It could be regarded as another kind of fate, right? However, Watergate's situation was still slightly better than Nangongzhe's. After all, Watergate's physical and spiritual power were overdrawn too severely. As long as he received reasonable treatment, there would be no root cause of the disease. On the contrary, Nangongzhe's fainting at the moment was not because of the problem of consumption, but because of the problem of his kendo will. The Book of Martial Arts said, "Sword, double-edged body, straight head, can hurt people horizontally and vertically, piercing through armor." It was extremely dangerous and was born to kill. As a double-edged weapon, the sword was more versatile than some single-edged weapons when it was used subtly, but once it was used incorrectly, it would hurt the user before hurting the enemy. Although it seemed that Nangongzhe had a ninja career for a period of time, unlike those ninjas who were good at carrying out assassinations or even some missions that went against the natural order, most of Nangongzhe's missions were head-on games on the battlefield or confrontations with the strong. Although he was in a ninja world where people would do anything to achieve their goals, Nangongzhi still carefully protected his heart. Almost every time he carried out a mission, he would go home and meditate for a period of time so that his heart would not be shrouded by the filth of the outside world. Because Nangongzhi knew better than anyone that once his heart became impure, then how could his sword skills be exquisite? But this time, for his own plan, for the development of the Blood Cloak Pavilion, and for the future of countless internal force practitioners, Nangongzhi personally crossed the bottom line that he had set for himself and began to use some underhanded moves to fight for his own interests. Perhaps many people would say that every man for himself and the devil takes the hindmost. In order to fight for enough benefits for oneself, so what if it crossed one's bottom line slightly? In any case, the bottom line could always be lowered again and again. If there was really a day when it could no longer be lowered, then it would be better to just give up on such a useless thing. But as a warrior and as a swordsman, often what was useless in the eyes of others was a rule that he had to abide by. This rule was the scabbard that bound his sharp sword. Once the scabbard was broken, a long sword without a scabbard and a swordsman without restrictions would lose its own spirituality and could only become a simple killing tool. It was precisely because of this that Nangongzhi fell into a coma due to his sword heart agitation. All of this was because Nangongzhi instinctively restrained himself. Otherwise, how could a few words from Watergate have the power to directly push Nangongzhi into a coma? In fact, Nangongzhi's consciousness did not disappear at this moment. On the contrary, he was very clear-headed. Relying on his powerful mental strength, Nangongzhi could almost see the entire situation on the battlefield with his eyes. Nangongzhi saw the bloody battle of the thick earth altar, the exquisite cooperation of the scarlet flame altar and the clear water altar, and the acute gold altar and the green wood altar moving around in all directions. However, these delightful situations still couldn't hide the fact that the disciples of the Blood Cloth Pavilion had suffered heavy losses at this moment. According to Nangongzhi's original plan, when the two sides exhausted to a certain extent, Nangongzhi would directly take many disciples of the Blood Cloth Pavilion and directly retreat to the Lion Clan's different space, and use the Lion Clan's different space as a springboard to return to the headquarters of the Blood Cloth Pavilion. After that, Nangongzhi would directly command the small countries under his control to directly form the Small Countries Alliance and declare war on the 5 major countries in the name of their country. Because most of the powerful ninjas of the 5 major countries were transferred away by the ninja allied forces, and the political leaders of the 5 major countries were also protected in a secret place by the ninja allied forces at this moment, there was no way for them to return to their own countries. At this moment, the ninjas of the Blood Cloth Pavilion were constantly attacking, and the miscellaneous troops of the small countries were taking over the cities captured by the Blood Cloth Pavilion. They wanted to capture the Land of Wind and the Land of Earth as quickly as possible and directly control half of the shinobi world. However, such a plan directly fell into a quagmire at this moment because of Nangongzhi's accidental coma. Even now, even if Nangongzhi could really wake up immediately and perhaps change such a war with his own strength, it would be difficult to carry out the final plan of swallowing the 2 countries and dividing the world. At this moment, Nangongzhi was not only restraining himself because his behavior violated the bottom line that he set for himself, but also because of his excessive trust in himself and his obstinance, which caused the disciples of the Blood Cloth Pavilion to suffer heavy losses. Even now, in order to protect himself, he had to confront the ninja allied forces head-on, which was constantly expanding the damage. Strong sadness and self-blame shrouded Nangongzhi's heart. Even Nangongzhi's body, which could no longer be controlled, slightly frowned because of such emotions. Seeing that Nangongzhi actually had a javelin transformation, Aoki, who had been staying beside Nangongzhi and constantly injecting internal energy into Nangongzhi's body, suddenly showed a trace of joy. Chapter 766. Although Old Man Qingmu was not an internal energy cultivator who specialized in swordsmanship, he was the oldest among the 5 element altar masters. He was also the most experienced elder of the Blood Garment Pavilion. He had his own understanding of Nangong's current situation. Although Nangongzhi had gathered together for various reasons and coincidentally triggered Nangongzhi's mental isolation, in essence, it was because Nangongzhi could not control himself and was unwilling to face reality directly. Although Nangongzhi's expression did not change much, it was still noticeable. Frowning might not be a good emotion, but at least it proved that there was something that could stimulate Nangongzhi, allowing Nangongzhi's emotions to break through the restraint that Nangongzhi had on his own will. As long as Elder Qingmu could stimulate Nangongzhi's will to a certain extent, then everything could be reversed. At this moment, Nangongzhi had actually fallen into an endless loop that he had set for himself. This did not mean that Nangongzhi was an inflexible person. Instead, it was because everyone's thinking was limited. No one was perfect. Even a normal person would inevitably make a lot of mistakes in their daily life, let alone a leader who had to deal with a lot of affairs every day and ensure that his strength would steadily improve and even surpass most people. My lord. I know you can hear me now. I am Qingmu, the altar master of the Greenwood altar. Qingmu attached his internal energy to his throat. Unlike Nangongzhi and Qi Yan who used their internal energy to amplify their voices, Qingmu used his internal energy to vibrate his throat constantly, giving his voice a strange charm. His voice rushed directly into Nangongzhi's ears with a special wave. Although Nangongzhi had weakened his five senses and could only hear some noises, Qingmu's voice was like a knife that directly pierced through all obstacles and rushed into Nangongzhi's mind. Qing Mu? Nangongzhi, who was immersed in his own mind, suddenly heard Qingmu's voice clearly. He was slightly stunned. After all, even Nangongzhi could not break free from his self-imposed isolation. When he suddenly heard Qingmu's voice, Nangongzhi naturally hoped that Qingmu, a veteran of the Blood Cloak Pavilion, would have a way to solve the problem that was happening to him. My lord, are you still not waking up? Although I don't particularly understand what kind of plan you have in mind, but this kind of situation where almost all the elite disciples of the Blood Clothing Pavilion have been exhausted is definitely not something that you have expected. Although Qingmu's words did not directly reprimand Nangongzhi, his tone was rather stiff. Obviously, he was quite upset. When Nangongzhi first came to the Blood Cloak Pavilion, it was Qingmu who first accepted Nangongzhi as the successor of the banishment, the master of the Heavenly Calamity Sword, and the future head of the Blood Cloak Pavilion. Even when the other 5 elements altar masters wanted Nangongzhi to take the Dragon Transformation Road test, Qingmu himself was biased towards Nangongzhi. Now that the most senior and most stable person in the Blood Cloak Pavilion had begun to resent Nangongzhi, what kind of attitude would the other people in the Blood Cloak Pavilion have towards Nangongzhi? Nangongzhi could not help but begin to worry. Although he was very confident that he had recruited many disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion over the years, and he could vaguely sense that the disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion were fighting a bloody battle, Nangongzhi could not help but begin to doubt himself after hearing Qingmu's words. He was worried that his many years of effort and management would directly go to waste because of this mistake. The reason why Nangongzhi suddenly had such a psychological change was that Nangongzhi was currently in an endless loop of his own thoughts. All the words that entered Nangongzhi's mind would be forcibly put into his own endless loop by Nangongzhi. Then, he would use this endless loop to attack himself. However, the more important reason was the sound technique that Qingmu used at this moment. This technique was not very common in the Blood Cloak Pavilion. It was a special attack called demonic sound. However, it was only useful when the opponent's mental state was extremely weak, or when there was an obvious flaw in the opponent's mental state. This kind of weak ability was particularly difficult to use. If one was not careful, the meridians in the neck would be damaged. If it was more serious, it could even directly take the user's life. Qingmu had accidentally found such a secret book in the Blood Cloak Pavilion's library. With his extremely strong recovery ability and his extremely steady character, he slowly honed this demonic sound while constantly suffering from minor injuries. Now that Nangongzhi was in a state of self-doubt, Mu naturally directly used the demonic sound to directly trigger the flaw in Gongjia's mind, causing Gongji to doubt himself again. It's not that I don't want to go out. It's not that I don't want to. Even though Gongji was in the mental world, his eyes directly turned scarlet, and even his body became distorted. Suddenly, the originally pitch-black mental world suddenly emitted a popping sound, which was like a bubble bursting. It was enough to show how excited Gongji was at this moment. However, Mu, who was in the outside world, could not see the changes in Gongji's mental world. He could only see Gongji's constantly changing facial expression. Therefore, Mu naturally thought that his method was effective. He directly used the demonic sound again to invade Gongji's mind, and gave him a strong dose of medicine. Overestimating your so-called cleverness and regarding others as chess pieces in your hands. In the end, you completely fail to see your own weakness. This is unwise. Placing the lives of everyone in the Blood Cloak Pavilion on the scale and directly destroying the future of the internal strength cultivators is disloyal. After encountering difficulties, you only know how to blindly escape. Even at a time like this, you still tightly lock yourself in your own mental world. This is unrighteous. Unwise, disloyal, and unrighteous. What right do you have to sit in the position of the head of the Blood Cloak Pavilion? Chapter 767. Most of the time, people would do bad things with good intentions. The reason why Elder Mu said so many words to hurt Gongjia's heart was that he wanted to stimulate Gongjia so that Gongjia could regain control of his body. However, Elder Mu had spent too little time with Gongjia. Although he had a certain understanding of Gongjia based on his subjective impression, he knew nothing about Gongjia's hidden personality. Elder Mu thought that Gongjia was tough enough to face all misunderstandings, so he directly said those words to Gongjia. If Mashiro, Gongro, Little Linger, or even Bishui were beside Elder Mu, they would immediately stop Elder Mu's actions. Dragons had a reverse scale, and those who touched it would die. Gongjia also had his reverse scale. Those things that Gongjia did not care about had no effect on Gongjia. However, once Gongjia believed that those who trusted him had doubts about him, Gongjia would also suffer a great blow. The Blood Cloak Pavilion was such an existence for Gongjia. However, Elder Mu had deliberately misled Gongjia with his demonic sound, and let this mistake directly pass through Gongjia's mind. This cycle of death was even worse. This was not helping Gongjia. Instead, it was worsening the accident that happened to Gongji, making Gongjia's current state more dangerous. Who is unwise? Who is unfaithful? Who is unrighteous? In Gongjia's spiritual world, Gongji fell into a kind of madness because of Elder Mu's demonic sound. This madness made Gongji beat his head with both hands, and his eyes turned red. Crack! A faint but clear sound echoed in Gongjia's spiritual world. Gongjia's instinctive restraint on himself was directly broken by Gongjia's deep madness. On the battlefield, Gongjia's body also opened his eyes. However, his black and white eyeballs had turned red and black. This pair of eyes was obviously not something that a normal person could have. Scarlet light shot out from Gongjia's opened eyes, and a violent demonic aura emanated from Gongjia's body. Not good. Although Elder Mu didn't know how wrong he was, he could tell that Gongji wasn't in a good state. On the contrary, it was extremely similar to the scene that Elder Mu had seen when an internal force cultivator turned into a demonic state. Seal. As soon as Elder Mu sensed that something was wrong, he directly stimulated all the internal force in his body and directly wrapped it around Gongjia's body. The internal force turned into small needles and pierced into Gongjia's major acupuncture points. Elder Qingmu was currently using his internal force to guide the violent power in Nangongzha's body out of Nangongzha's body. He hoped that this method would prevent the violent internal force from destroying Nangongzha's body. At the same time, he also wanted to prevent Nangongzha from turning into a demonic state and starting a crazy massacre. When Nangongzha woke up, there was a big movement. The scarlet light emitted from his eyes directly condensed and rushed into the sky. On the battlefield, whether it was the disciples of the Blood-Robe Pavilion or the ninjas of the Ninja Allied Forces, they all saw the two beams of light and Nangongzha's opened eyes. Seeing that Nangongzha had woken up, the disciples of the Blood-Robe Pavilion were naturally happy. Although their leader didn't seem to be in a good state, at least their leader had opened his eyes and was exuding a terrifying aura. As long as he was still alive, there was still a chance. At this moment, the pressure in the hearts of the ninjas of the Ninja Allied Forces became even greater. After all, it was obvious that the Ninja Allied Forces were at a disadvantage in the battle between the Bloodcloth Pavilion and the Ninja Allied Forces. Once a powerhouse like Nangongzha joined the battle, not to mention Nangongzha's full strength, even if he only recovered half of his strength, it would be enough to kill the ninjas of the Ninja Allied Forces. With the morale rising, the Ninja Allied Forces were naturally suppressed even more fiercely. Even though Naruto had tried his best to protect the Ninja Allied Forces in the battle with Sasuke, a large number of ninjas of the Ninja Allied Forces were directly killed by the disciples of the Blood-Robe Pavilion. Because of the death of a large number of ninjas, the blood was directly thrown on the ground, and the smell of blood in the air became stronger. A large amount of the smell of blood was like gasoline, directly pouring into Nangongzha's already unconscious mind. The scarlet light emitted from his eyes became even more dazzling. Nangongzha's body also began to struggle madly under the situation where his acupoints were pierced by the inner strength. However, the more Elder Aoki restrained Nangongzha with internal force, the more he understood how dangerous and terrifying Nangongzha's situation was at this moment. He could only clench his teeth and use all the strength in his body to temporarily suppress Nangongzha's movements. After the battle with the 6 Kage-level ninjas, Elder Aoki began to inject his internal force into Nangongzha's body to stabilize Nangongzha's injury. At this moment, because Nangongzha suddenly turned into a demon, Elder Aoki also consumed a lot of his internal force. Even though Elder Aoki had cultivated for many years and his internal force was very strong, he couldn't withstand such consumption. At this moment, Elder Aoki's face also became pale. After checking the internal force in his body, Elder Aoki estimated that he could only keep Nangongzha immobile for about 5 minutes. After this time, Nangongzha would regain his freedom, and then no one would be able to restrict Nangongzha's movements. Suddenly, a powerful force erupted from Nangongzha's body and began to directly attack Elder Aoki's internal force. This restriction once again shortened the time that Elder Aoki could restrain Nangongzha. At the same time, it also allowed Nangongzha to gain control of part of his body, such as his mouth. Murderous intent, sword energy, internal force, evil spirit, and various other abilities directly gathered in Nangongzha's mouth. A simple character directly burst out from Nangongzha's mouth, and a chill rose in the hearts of everyone on the battlefield. Kill. Chapter 768. When Nangongzha uttered the word kill, the long-awaited Yama's shadow appeared behind Nangongzha. The ferocious Yama stood quietly behind Nangongzha. However, everyone who heard Nangongzha's kill vaguely saw a king of hell standing in front of them and staring at them. It was as if he was judging what kind of sin they had committed and what kind of method they should use to make them pay for their sins. However, the Yama's shadow only flashed by. It was completely triggered by the killing intent in Nangongzha's heart. Everyone only saw it for a brief moment. Without the support of Nangongzha's power, it also disappeared. However, Elder Qingmu, who was the closest to Nangongzha, was obviously more affected than the others. After all, Elder Qingmu was currently restraining Nangongjia's movements against Nangongjia's will. If it wasn't for the fact that Elder Qingmu didn't have any malicious intent towards Nangongja, it was very likely that Elder Qingmu would have been killed by the killing intent of the Yama's shadow when it appeared. Even so, Elder Qingmu's head became extremely dizzy at this moment. All the guilt that Elder Qingmu thought he had long forgotten surfaced in his mind. At this moment, Elder Qingmu was unable to concentrate on using his internal force to restrict Nangongjia's movements. Just as Old Man Qingmu could no longer maintain his consciousness, a rather rough voice reverberated in Old Man Qingmu's mind. Suppress. It was just a simple word, but at this moment, it seemed to have received a response from heaven and earth. It directly suppressed all the chaos in Elder Qingmu's mind. Elder Qingmu opened his eyes and suddenly saw a stalwart man in a black cloak standing beside Nangongja. The man's hair and beard were fluttering, and he had a pair of round eyes. However, for some reason, this man's figure seemed somewhat illusory. I think you have probably guessed who I am. I am Black Lion Li Yang, the familiar beast of the blood-robed pavilion's current leader. That's right, the man who suddenly appeared beside Nangongja and used a mantra to suppress the chaos in Elder Qingmu's mind was Black Lion Li Yang. In the previous battle, Nangongja had summoned Black Lion Li Yang to fight. However, there were many old, young, and women of the blood-robed pavilion left behind by Nangongja in the Lion Clan different space. In order to maintain the stability of the Lion Clan different space, Black Lion Li Yang had directly returned to the different space to suppress it. Even now, Li Yang felt that Nangongja was not in a normal state through the lion head seal that he had established with Nangongja. He tried his best to force his will to descend upon Nangongja's side. Of course, Elder Qingmu of the blood-robed pavilion greets the sacred beast. When Black Lion Li Yang heard Elder Qingmu calling him a sacred beast, he was shocked. However, the shock only lasted for a moment before it was suppressed. Although his relationship with the blood-robed pavilion was not well known, there must be some records in the ancient books of the blood-robed pavilion. He had never deliberately hidden his identity, so it was not impossible for an old man like Elder Qingmu to know his past identity. It's all in the past, so let's not talk about it. Right now, I'm just Nangong's familiar beast. I'm just fighting alongside him. The reason why I'm here isn't because of anything else. I'm here to solve the complicated situation Nangongja is in. Do whatever I say. Otherwise, Nangongja might really turn into a demon and never be able to recover. Elder Qingmu nodded in response. Perhaps the young juniors weren't aware of the identity of Li Yang, who called himself a familiar beast. However, Elder Qingmu, who had read all the ancient books in the blood-robed pavilion, knew that Li Yang was the one who fought alongside the blood-robed pavilion's ancestor. Li Yang naturally wouldn't harm the blood-robed pavilion, the faction created by the banishment pavilion, nor would he harm Nangongja, the successor of the banishment pavilion. Please enlighten me, Your Excellency Li Yang. I will do my best to fulfill your request. Li Yang nodded slowly. After all, Qingmu had been very steady and calm ever since Li Yang appeared. Even though Nangongja was in a critical situation, Qingmu didn't lose his composure. Therefore, Li Yang wasn't worried about Qingmu's ability to execute Li Yang's orders perfectly. Instead, Li Yang glanced at the calamity sword beside Nangongja and sent a portion of his mental strength into the sword to communicate with the sword spirit. Continue to condense your internal strength into needles and pierce the acupoints with your internal strength. Do you understand? Li Yang didn't care whether Qingmu responded to her question or not. Instead, she continued to spew out the names of the acupuncture points and the depth of the stab like a cannonball at Qingmu. Foot Taiyang Bladder Meridian Spleen Acupoint. 1 Cun 3 Fun. Stomach Meridian Foot 3 Li Acupoint. 2 Cun 1 Fun. Ren Meridian Shanzhong Acupoint. 1 Fun 2 Cun. 9 acupoints were listed in a row, and the depth of the needles was precisely specified. This greatly increased the difficulty of Elder Qing Mu's acupuncture. His pale face became even paler. Even his hair seemed to have dried up due to the great exhaustion of his spirit and body. You don't have to do the last acupoint. But you must ensure that the first 9 needles don't dissipate. Li Yang didn't know if it was because she saw that Qing Mu had consumed too much energy and was afraid that Qing Mu's treatment would fail because of her weakness, or because she didn't intend to let Qing Mu proceed with the last step. She directly asked Qing Mu to stop the acupuncture and stand aside to rest. Aoki had a lot of trust in Li Yang. Since Li Yang asked him to stand aside, he immediately sat down and began to recover the large amount of internal energy in his body. Chapter 769. Old man Qing Mu, who had used up a lot of energy, didn't have the strength to continue using his internal energy and stabilize the golden needles. So, he could only leave the last part to Li Yang. Li Yang closed his eyes and urged his mental power to infiltrate the tribulation sword. He used all kinds of methods to communicate with the sword spirit contained in the tribulation sword. The sword of calamity did have its own spirituality, the so-called sword spirit. However, even after so many years of nurturing, the sword spirit still only had a very simple intelligence. If it wasn't for the close relationship between Li Yang and the banishment, the sword spirit wouldn't have instinctively rejected Li Yang. Li Yang's mental power might have been torn to shreds by the tribulation lightning contained in the sword of calamity. Facing an existence like this that didn't have complete intelligence, Li Yang naturally couldn't expect it to easily understand him. So, he could only use different methods to make the sword of calamity understand him. Under Li Yang's constant persuasion, the sword of calamity's spirituality was stimulated. The body of the sword of calamity trembled like a child who was paralyzed on the ground and wanted to use its small arms and legs to stand up. It seemed a little clumsy, but it was exceptionally patient. That's right, sword of calamity. Just like that, he slowly controlled his body to stand upright. Then, he floated in the air and listened to my commands. Only by following my instructions will your master be able to regain his consciousness, and not become a puppet controlled by his own evil thoughts. Li Yang continuously used his mental power to encourage the sword spirit in the sword of calamity, and repeatedly emphasized that the sword of calamity should listen to his orders. As a sword spirit, although its intelligence wasn't complete, it was because its intelligence was relatively weak that it was more sensitive to other people's mental fluctuations. At this moment, the person who was constantly encouraging him didn't have any evil intentions in his heart. Instead, he had a hint of intimacy with him. That was why the sword spirit listened to Li Yang and constantly controlled his body to complete Li Yang's requests. As the heavenly tribulation sword spirit continued to work hard, the heavenly tribulation sword's body actually became vertical as Li Yang had requested. The hilt was facing up while the tip was facing down. It was constantly rotating on its own. A sharp aura was emitted from the heavenly tribulation sword. Now, float 1 foot above the ground and aim 1.5 inches below your master's navel. Li Yang's order came again. The sword of calamity didn't know where the tip of its sword was aiming at. 1.5 inches below the navel wasn't an unimportant acupuncture point. Instead, it was an acupuncture point that was close to the foundation of internal strength cultivators, the sea of breath point. A large amount of internal strength was accumulated in such an acupuncture point. Internal strength cultivators relied on expanding the capacity of the sea of breath point and widening the width of their meridians to increase their strength. Now, Li Yang had the sword spirit of calamity directly aim at the Qihai acupoint, which was the foundation of internal energy cultivators. Qing Mu, who was meditating beside Nangongzhe, immediately stopped meditating. He immediately jumped up from his meditating position and reached out his hand to grab the sword spirit of calamity. He wanted to stop the sword spirit of calamity from piercing such an important acupoint. He wanted to ask Li Yang what he was thinking to do such a thing. At this moment, Li Yang's eyes were fixed on Nangong's Sea of Breath point. No one knew what he was thinking or calculating. He ignored Qing Mu's attempt to grab the Sword of Calamity with his own hand. The Sword of Calamity had its own consciousness, the Sword of Calamity's spirit. Anyone who wanted to touch the Sword of Calamity would be attacked by the Sword of Calamity's Thunder of Calamity under the control of the Sword of Calamity's spirit. Qing Mu naturally reached out to grab the hilt of the Sword of Calamity, so he bore the brunt of the powerful thunder rushing into his body. Lightning itself had a powerful paralyzing and invasive property. At this moment, old man Qing Mu had already entered a state of extreme exhaustion due to his various actions. Under the effects of the lightning's paralysis and his own exhaustion, old man Qing Mu fell into a coma. Only his hand, which was holding onto the hilt of the heavenly tribulation sword, seemed to be tightly holding onto the sword due to the stimulation of the lightning. Now, Li Yang's eyes, which had been empty and lifeless, suddenly shone brightly. Because the heavenly tribulation sword had suddenly released the heavenly punishment lightning because of old man Qing Mu's actions, Nangong's internal energy, which had a certain degree of affinity with the heavenly punishment lightning, was affected by it and began to boil. Li Yang also stared at this moment. He directly sent his mental power into the Heaven's Calamity Sword and poured all the energy he used to maintain the Phantom into the Heaven's Calamity Sword. He issued a final command to the Heaven's Calamity Sword Spirit, "Stab here a little." The Sword of Calamity's spirit immediately executed the order and stabbed Nangong's Sea of Breath point after receiving Li Yang's order. Li Yang disappeared due to the exhaustion of energy. Qing Mu couldn't speak because he had fallen into a coma. The Sword of Calamity didn't have complete intelligence, so it naturally had a way to speak. However, at this moment, a sharp female voice suddenly rang out on the battlefield. "Qing Mu, you old bastard! How dare you?" At this moment, Qing Mu's posture was too misleading. His hand was tightly holding the Sword of Calamity, and his face was lowered so that no one could see his expression. The sword was already stabbed into Nangong's abdomen, and the wound was still bleeding. No matter how one looked at it, it was Qing Mu who directly stabbed the Sword of Calamity into Nangong's abdomen. He wanted to take Nangong's life. Bai Shui, who had been fighting the allied forces with Qi Yan and Ho Tu on the main battlefield, occasionally looked back at Qing Mu's situation. He just happened to see Qing Mu directly stabbing the Sword of Calamity into Nangong's abdomen. Bai Shui, who had always been very calm, no longer had his usual calmness after seeing this scene. Instead, he roared in the direction of old man Qing Mu as if he had exploded. Chapter 770. Bai Shui's roar attracted the attention of all the disciples of the Blood Cloth Pavilion and the ninjas of the Ninja Alliance to Old Man Aoki. Almost everyone saw the scene of Old Man Aoki directly stabbing the Tribulation Sword into Nangong's body. Everyone was shocked speechless by this scene. After all, Old Man Aoki could be said to be a model of virtue and prestige in the Blood Cloth Pavilion. At this moment, he actually stabbed his own head with a long sword? However, just when everyone was surprised, Nangongzhe, who was lying on the ground and seemingly unable to move, suddenly stretched out a hand and grabbed the Tribulation Sword. The sharp Tribulation Sword was tightly held by Nangongzhe, but it didn't cut Nangongzhe's hand. Instead, it seemed to be very excited and trembled slightly. Okay, calm down a little. I'm still injured here. If you move around, it won't be so easy to recover. Nangongzhe's slightly weak but exceptionally gentle voice directly transmitted to everyone's ears. Bai Shui, who was slowly filled with anger, heard Nangongzhe's voice at this moment, and her anger turned into drops of tears that directly overflowed from her eyes. After hearing Nangongzhe's words, the Tribulation Sword seemed to be afraid that its movement would worsen Nangongzhe's injury, so it also quieted down. Nangongzhe gently placed his hand on Old Man Qing Mu's hand, which was gripping the hilt of the Calamity sword because of his tight muscles. A thick stream of internal force was transmitted into Old Man Qing Mu's body just like that, making Old Man Qing Mu's nerves, which had been tense due to the passage of lightning, relax. Old Man Aoki's muscles suddenly relaxed, and his entire body collapsed to the ground because of the lack of support. At this moment, everyone saw Old Man Aoki's pale and aged face because of excessive consumption. The moment Bai Shui saw Old Man Aoki's complexion, her heart was filled with guilt. After all, Old Man Aoki's current condition was extremely bad. It was obvious that he had used up a lot of his source energy to deal with Nan Gongjia's problem. If he couldn't replenish his source energy in the future, it was very likely that Old Man Aoki's lifespan would be greatly shortened. Nan Gongjia reached out and grabbed the Tribulation sword's hilt, directly pulling it out of his body. He stroked the wound left by the Tribulation sword with his other hand, and a thick internal force directly adhered to the wound, stopping the bleeding and constantly helping the wound heal. Nan Gongjia's mind and body were indeed controlled by the murderous aura and all kinds of dangerous energy in his body because he was possessed by the devil. However, Old Man Aoki's 9 precise acupuncture points directly channeled the chaotic energy in Nan Gongjia's body, preventing Nan Gongjia's state of being possessed by the devil from spreading. However, the most important thing was the last stab of the Tribulation sword. This stab directly touched Nan Gongjia's dantian, which contained a large amount of internal force. However, it didn't pierce through it, and just touched the edge of the dantian. The moment it touched the dantian, the energy that Li Yang injected into the Tribulation sword at the last moment was directly transmitted to Nan Gongjia's dantian. The moment the energy that contained Li Yang's will entered Nan Gongjia's dantian, it began to display its own power. Lions were ferocious, unstoppable, and intimidating. They were the king of all beasts. Li Yang, as the black lion among lions, was able to display the unique characteristics of a lion to the extreme, such as bravery and deterrence. Li Yang's power had the special ability to suppress evil spirits. Being possessed by the devil was a phenomenon that occurred when the power in one's body lost control and stimulated the ferocious nature in one's body. When Li Yang's power entered Nan Gongjia's body, it immediately formed a powerful force with internal force and began to fight the evil spirit in Nan Gongjia's body. Although both sides consumed some energy in the process, the evil spirit in Nan Gongjia's body was successfully suppressed. This could be seen from Nan Gongjia's eyes that had returned to normal. After the evil spirit in his body was suppressed, Nan Gongjia's will also directly awakened. Nan Gongjia glanced at Old Man Qing Mu who had fallen to the ground. He didn't put on any airs and directly went to Old Man Qing Mu's side to help him up. Then, he beckoned a disciple of the Blood Cloak Pavilion and handed Old Man Qing Mu to him. Then, he walked directly to the center of the battlefield. There was a great terror between life and death. The evil spirit controlling one's body was a phenomenon that drifted between life and death. It was precisely because of this great terror that Nan Gongjia's mental state had a breakthrough. At Nan Gongjia's level, the accumulation of internal force was not so important. Every breakthrough in mental state could bring about the greatest benefits to a person. Nan Gongjia slowly walked to the center of the battlefield step by step. The momentum on his body also became stronger and stronger. Nan Gongjia's sword domain was opened little by little. The sword domain's auxiliary ability was greater than its offensive ability. At this moment, it had become extraordinarily powerful. Everyone who was wrapped in Nan Gongjia's sword domain felt an unstoppable powerful edge waiting for an opportunity to strike. Looking at the huge purple Susanoo floating in the sky, the 3 altar lords of the Blood Cloak Pavilion, and the many disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion who were constantly fighting with the allied forces, Nan Gongjia directly said to everyone, "Everyone, stop attacking now." Although it was not so clear why Nan Gongjia issued such an order, many ninjas of the Blood Cloak Pavilion had a kind of instinctive obedience to Nan Gongjia. The moment they heard Nan Gongjia's order, they immediately stopped attacking. Even if the opposite ninja may be stabbing towards them at this moment, the disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion still directly withdrew the weapons in their hands. Of course, Nan Gongzhi couldn't let the people on his side stop attacking without any precaution. Almost at the moment when Nan Gongzhi issued the order to stop attacking, the powerful sword domain around Nan Gongzhi's body was directly released, enveloping everyone on the battlefield. The ninjas of the allied forces were directly surrounded by the sword chi derived from the sword domain. Once they made the slightest move to attack, they would be directly strangled by the sword chi. Chapter 771. For ordinary ninjas, Nan Gongzhi's kenjutsu sword energy, even if it's only one, is fatal. When a large number of kenjutsu's kenjutsu sword domain is wrapped around them, they naturally don't dare to act rashly because of fear of kenjutsu sword energy. For the 6 Kage-level powerhouses led by the Woodleaf Sannin and the 3 Kage-level powerhouses, although they weren't so afraid of Nan Gongzhi's sword chi, these powerful people had been in high positions for many years and also had a very far-reaching political vision. After the awakening of a super powerhouse like Nan Gongzhi, the Blood Cloth Pavilion had already taken the initiative of the entire battle. It was obviously an easy victory, but Nan Gongzhi directly gave up and ordered the entire Blood Cloth Pavilion to stop the attack. Such behavior was beyond everyone's imagination. Since Nan Gongzhi had issued such an order, then naturally, he had to give all the disciples of the Blood Cloth Pavilion who were loyal to him an explanation. Otherwise, even if Nan Gongzhi had a high prestige in the Blood Cloth Pavilion, it was still possible for him to face the situation of being betrayed. Just when everyone was waiting for Nan Gongzhi to give them an explanation, Nan Gongzhi didn't disappoint everyone's expectations. He directly walked to the center of the battlefield with the Heaven's Disaster Sword in his hand. The disciples of the Blood Cloth Pavilion naturally stared closely at Nan Gongzhi, the head of the Blood Cloth Pavilion, while many ninjas of the ninja allied forces couldn't move at will because of the sword chi binding them. Disciples of the Blood Cloth Pavilion and ninjas of the ninja allied forces, I believe that I don't need to introduce myself too much. I am Nan Gongzhi, the head of the Blood Cloth Pavilion. I believe that now you are quite puzzled by my direct request for the entire Blood Cloth Pavilion to stop the battle and use sword chi to bind the ninjas, but you don't have to worry, I will naturally slowly tell you my own thoughts. Nan Gongzhi held the Heaven's Disaster Sword in his hand. His body did not emit the slightest bit of malice. He only used a pair of indifferent eyes to look at the ninja allied army and the Blood Cloth Pavilion who were participating in the battle. His eyes were slowly filled with an inexplicable compassion. At this moment, Nan Gongzhi did not hide the emotions in his eyes. Instead, everyone could see that his eyes were gradually becoming more compassionate. Originally, the reason why I took the disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion to fight against the Ninja Coalition army was very simple. Our Blood Garment Pavilion's development has reached a bottleneck. This kind of peace does not only come from the Blood Garment Pavilion's internal problems, but also from the external environment. Although the ninja world isn't small, it's not that big either. While accommodating 5 behemoths, the 5 major ninja villages, it's impossible to accommodate another behemoth of the same size. Nan Gongzhi's eyes swept over the 3 Kages, Gara, Mei, and A, who were standing in the ninja allied army. After being met by Nan Gongzhi's eyes, the 3 Kages also couldn't help but show some approval. As the Kages of the ninja villages, no one knows better than them that such a big cake like the ninja world is not so big. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a ninja world war for various reasons. I don't just represent myself. From the moment I wore the blood-red robes and held the heavenly calamity sword in my hand as the head of the Blood Garment Pavilion, I didn't just represent myself. I also represented countless disciples of the Blood Garment Pavilion. Not only for myself, but also for the thousands of disciples of the Blood Cloak Pavilion. I have no choice but to fight and fight for more benefits for them. Even if it goes against my own will, I will not hesitate. Perhaps the ninjas of the Ninja Allied Forces didn't know how much Nangongzhi had done for the Blood Cloth Pavilion, but the disciples of the Blood Cloth Pavilion were very clear about how much Nangongzhi had done for the Blood Cloth Pavilion. If it wasn't for Nangongzhi's contributions to the Blood Cloth Pavilion over the years, even if the Blood Cloth Pavilion was an organization with great potential, it would be impossible for it to develop so quickly. So after hearing Nangongzhi's words, many disciples of the Blood Cloth Pavilion couldn't help but be moved. Maybe you don't know why I fainted just now. It's not because of any physical damage, but because I heard some words of the fourth Hokage wave Watergate. It touched my own will. I began to think deeply about whether I should stick to my own will or give up part of my will for the sake of the disciples of the Blood Cloth Pavilion. To be honest, even now, I haven't found a perfect answer to this question, because whether it's public interest or selfishness, it's a part of my mood. If I can't face and accept such a mood, then I'm really irresponsible to myself. Ninjas pursue the ninja path that they set for themselves. Such a so-called ninja path is a path that guides them forward and makes them stronger. Once they violate their own ninja path, then there will be no room for further progress, and they will directly block their own path of becoming stronger. For internal force cultivators, what they seek is their own heart. Internal force cultivators' practice is a kind of practice that constantly develops their body and spirit with the help of the forces of nature. Therefore, in such a process, when facing a substantial imbalance in the development of their physical and spiritual abilities, the so-called heart devil will appear, that is, the power that is difficult to control will disturb their mind. Therefore, in the process of internal force cultivators' practice, what they need to adhere to is their own heart. Once they violate their own heart, they will directly be disturbed by the heart devil, and their strength will be damaged, and in the worst case, they will die. Nangongzhi didn't hide anything. Instead, he directly told what happened to him. Hearing that Nangongzhi fell into such a dangerous situation because of his own heart and the needs of the Blood Cloth Pavilion, the disciples of the Blood Cloth Pavilion couldn't help but feel ashamed in their hearts. After all, it was their incompetence that caused Nangongzhi to fall into such a dangerous situation. After hearing Nangongzhi's words, the ninjas of the Ninja Allied Forces also resonated with Nangongzhi's love for the Blood Cloth Pavilion and his restraint of his emotions. After all, as a ninja, almost every ninja has more or less experienced such a situation where their own heart and the interests of the ninja village conflict. Since they have similar experiences, they naturally have similar resonance. You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.